The one who saves a failing sect? Will they be its savior or its ruin? The sky is painted a sickly scarlet, and the scent of death permeates the air. There is no more hope, only the absolute end. A lifeless body falls, separating what remained of honor from what is now merely flesh, silence, and dust. The earth drinks the blood of heroes, as a trembling hand desperately seeks support that no longer exists amidst the chaos. Chung Myung stares into the void, with eyes that have seen hell. His face is bathed in the warm blood of his own brothers. His sword, once a symbol of purity and power, is now a filthy blade, plunged into the soil of a world that has just crumbled. He breathes with difficulty, each gasp of air pure agony, as the weight of defeat crushes his already weary soul. Deep cuts tear his skin, silent witnesses to a visceral battle that left no victors, only completely broken survivors. Around him, the elite of the martial world is mercilessly slaughtered, lives mowed down like wheat before a relentless and malevolent scythe. The metallic taste of blood fills his mouth, a constant reminder that the end is knocking at the door with blind fury. With a sword piercing his chest, Chung Myung feels life draining away, but the fire of hatred still burns in his veins. The battlefield is a carpet of corpses, a suffocating sight that marks the end of a golden age of martial arts. He whispers the name of his Sayung Jangmun, feeling the pain of loss surpass any physical wound his body can bear. His bloodshot eyes focus on the devastation, an image that will forever be etched into what remains of his fading consciousness. The hand that once wielded justice can now barely clench, trembling beneath the icy chill of rapidly approaching death. Chung Myung coughs blood, the vital fluid staining his white robes now transformed into a shroud of war and profound pain. He clenches a piece of cloth, the last vestige of his sect, vowing that this sacrifice will not be in vain no matter the cost. Even with his body impaled by multiple blades, the Sword Saint refuses to fall like a mere coward before destiny. Every wound is a scream of agony, but his mind remains fixed on the enemy, who caused all this unprecedented destruction. He raises his weapon one last time, determination shining amidst the despair of a man who has nothing left to lose. In a monstrous final surge, he charges against the shadow that devoured the world, ignoring the pain that should paralyze him. Steel sings in the heavy air, a strike charge with all the internal energy remaining in his nearly depleted spiritual core. Before him stands the heavenly demon Chunma, with red eyes emanating an aura of pure evil and overwhelming power. The impact is overwhelming, a kick that breaks bones and makes the ground tremble under the brute force of two colliding titans. Chunma smiles with scorn, the kind of icy gaze that could freeze the blood of any ordinary warrior, but not his. A dazzling glow emanates from Chung Myung's fist, the supreme technique of the Mount Hua Sect being invoked at its desperate peak. The young warrior in white plunges into the climax, transforming his very life into fuel for the strike that must end everything. The demon's gaze flickers for a thousandth of a second as he sees the light of the plum blossom bloom amidst the darkness. It's a deadly dance where the white of purity confronts the black of the abyss, a spectacle of destruction that illuminates the bloody night. Chunma realizes he underestimated this man's indomitable will, and fear finally begins to creep into his shadowy features. Chung Myung's dark hair whips in the wind as he pours every ounce of his existence into that decisive, final moment. The body falls, silence finally descending upon the battlefield, but the price paid was the total annihilation of a lineage. With blood streaming from his mouth, he smiles. He knows the demon has fallen, even if he has to go with him. The warrior in white lies fallen, surrounded by emptiness, his mission accomplished, but at the cost of everything he loved most. His vision darkens, the vibrant world he knew blurring into a haze of pain and a strangely cold, heavy peace. Chung Myung closes his eyes, ready for death's embrace, believing he will finally reunite with his brothers in the afterlife. Swords plunged into the earth are the only monuments left to tell the tale of bravery that unfolded on that hallowed ground. Darkness swallows him whole, a deep slumber where memories of war and plum blossoms intertwine and fade away. Time passes, weapons rust, and nature tries to hide the scars of a war that almost extinguished the world's light. But fate has different plans for the Sword Saint, and death will not be the end, but a bizarre new beginning. The xianxia mountains watch in silence as the cycle of life prepares for a turn that will shock the martial world. Years later, a baby is left in a basket before a temple, crying for a future he does not yet comprehend. White-bearded elders observe the child with curiosity, unaware that they hold in their arms the reincarnation of a living legend from the past. At Mount Hua Temple, life continues, but the glory of yesteryear is now just a distant whisper in empty halls. Young disciples train with wooden swords, their movements mere shadows of the divine technique that Chung Myung once perfectly mastered. The sun shines on the training ground, but the spirit is missing, the flame that made the sect the most respected in all of Merim. A master reprimands the new recruits, his voice laden with a frustration that seems to stem from decades of decadence and shame. Young Chung Myung, now reincarnated, listens to the scolding with an expression of absolute boredom that deeply annoys his immediate superiors. He looks at his small hands, feeling the strangeness of being trapped in a body that does not yet respond to his will. After a deliberate mistake, he is knocked to the ground, feeling the humiliation of being treated as a talentless novice by mere amateurs. The bearded man stares at him with disdain, unaware that he stands before the man who could kill him with a single movement. Chung Myung wipes the wound on his face, his eyes gleaming with ancient intelligence and an arrogance that doesn't belong to a child. The master continues his sermon, speaking of honor and effort, words that sound hollow to someone who has already given his life for the sect. Time leaps forward again, and reality becomes harsher. The luxury of the temple has given way to the misery of dusty streets. Suddenly, a violent impact shakes his world, an external force tearing him from his thoughts and thrusting him into reality. He awakens surrounded by strangers, the air thick with the smell of grime and the tension of those living on the fringes. Chung Myung looks at his calloused, filthy hands, trying to understand how the great Sword Saint ended up in such a deplorable state. He realizes his hair is disheveled and his clothes are mere rags barely covering his thin, malnourished body of today. A young man wielding a staff glares at him with hostility, demanding something Chung Myung can't yet process in his confused mind. What's happening here, he thinks, as the world around him seems to spin into a spiral of utter confusion. The boy with the staff threatens him, acting like the king of a beggar's territory, completely unaware of whom he's provoking. Chung Myung tries to remain calm, but this brat's insolence is starting to make his ancient blood boil with rage. The aggressor continues to shout, his shrill voice an insult to the ears of one who once commanded armies and martial masters. They exchange harsh words, and the tension escalates to the point where dialogue is no longer a viable option. Chung Myung's gaze turns icy, the kind of look that used to make generals tremble, but the beggar is too foolish to notice. The staff descends towards him with intent to cause pain, a clumsy attack that would be laughable in any other circumstance of life. He moves his hand instinctively, but the shock of reality hits him. This body is slow, weak, and possesses no energy whatsoever. Surprise etches his face as he realizes his legendary agility has vanished, leaving him vulnerable to such a mediocre blow. He is struck and thrown against the wall, feeling the physical pain of a body never trained to withstand real impacts. This is ridiculous, he snarls internally, wiping away the dust as his aggressor laughs at his apparent weakness and lack of reaction. The beggar advances again, confident he has total control of the situation, pushing Chung Myung with suffocating and irritating arrogance. Rage explodes within him, not just from the blow, but from the deplorable situation fate has placed him in after his death. He tries to fight back, but his short arms fail to reach the target, making the scene almost comical if it weren't so tragic. The staff strikes his back with a dry crack, sending a wave of throbbing pain through his entire debilitated nervous system. He falls to the ground again, dust entering his lungs as the aggressor continues his cowardly assault against one who cannot fight. The young man with the staff mocks his state, calling him trash and ordering him to learn his place in the hierarchy. Chung Myung takes a deep breath, trying to channel any spark of chi that might remain in his soul through this new flesh. His eyes narrow, and a shadow of his ancient menacing aura begins to leak out, even if this body can barely contain it. The aggressor hesitates for a second, feeling an inexplicable chill, but soon resumes his attack, driven by his own stupidity and greed. Chung Myung slowly rises, his legs trembling not from fear but from the effort to maintain dignity amidst the mud. His face is marked with grime, but his expression is that of a king temporarily dethroned and about to exact his price. He glares at the young beggar, a gaze carrying the weight of centuries of battles and contempt for such insignificant beings. A low growl escapes his lips, a promise that the pain he feels now will be returned tenfold. Another young man approaches, observing the scene with a mix of fear and curiosity, unsure whether to interfere or flee. Chung Myung ignores his surroundings, focusing only on the injustice of being humiliated by a fifth-rate pickpocket. They argue, but the Sword Saint realizes that the rules of this new world are very different from those he himself helped create. The dark-haired boy tries to mediate, but Chung Myung's fury has already reached the point of no return, igniting his spirit. A hand grabs him, trying to force him into submission, but he breaks free with a move that, though weak, demonstrates refined technique. He shouts his indignation, asking if they have any idea who he is, though he knows the answer is an obvious and painful no. Confusion reigns as he tries to explain his lineage, but to the beggars, he's just another orphan driven mad by hunger. The scene is pathetic, a legendary master in rags arguing with children in a filthy alley as the sun sets on the horizon. His eyes gleam with fierce determination. He will not accept this life. He will not accept being just another face in the crowd. He confronts the dark-haired youth, demanding answers about the current state of the world and about the sect he once loved. The answers he receives are vague and full of slang he doesn't recognize, further increasing his sense of total isolation. He realizes the world has changed, and perhaps he is the only one who still remembers true honor and true strength. The young beggar looks at him as if he were a lunatic, laughing at the grandiose words coming from the mouth of a starving boy. Chung Myung bites his lip, tasting blood and dust, vowing that he will make each of them bow before his name. The conversation continues, but the gap between eras is too vast to be bridged with mere words spoken in a filthy alley. He observes the young beggar's thin arms, realizing that lack of training and nutrition is the norm for people of this era. Where's the strength? Where are the warriors? He asks himself, feeling an emptiness in his chest that aches more than any punch. He is pushed again, the brutal reality of his current physical weakness hitting him like a bucket of cold water on a winter night. Chung Myung's face contorts into a grimace of pure frustration. He needs power. He needs to restore his martial core. His eyes close for a moment as he tries to sense the flow of chi, finding only blocked channels and stagnant energy. The voices around him turn into white noise as he delves into his own mind, searching for a solution to this existential dilemma. He turns to face the beggars again, realizing that to survive here, he will have to act like one of them, for now at least. Fury gives way to calculating coldness. He will start from scratch and rebuild his empire upon the ashes of what remained of the past. He clenches his fist tightly, dirty skin stretching over bones, a silent symbol of his unbreakable will to return to the top. The beggars exchange glances, sensing that something has changed in the boy they just beat, an invisible pressure beginning to emanate from him. Chung Myung breaks into a sinister smile. If they want a beggar, he'll give them the most dangerous beggar who ever walked the earth. He begins to ask specific questions, trying to map the political and martial landscape of this new century through the casual conversations of the beggars. Every fragment of information is a piece of a puzzle he's determined to assemble to understand his new reality. The young beggar responds reluctantly, but Chung Myung's aura compels him to keep talking, even without understanding why. He discovers that the beggars' unions still exists, but its hierarchy has drastically changed since the times when he was a saint. The conversation reveals that the martial world has endured turmoil, and that many legendary names have been forgotten or distorted by popular legends and time. Chung Myung feels a pang in his heart, realizing that his own existence has become merely a distant myth for the new generations. He asks about Mount Hua, and the answer he receives makes him freeze. The sect he protected with his life is in ruins. The shock is visible. How could the most powerful sect in the world fall so far in just 1 century of his physical absence? He refuses to believe it, his mind struggling to process the idea that his legacy has been reduced to nothing more than dust. The world around him seems to lose focus as he tries to digest the news of the fall of his beloved spiritual and martial home. He demands to know more, his voice now laden with an authority that makes the beggars take a step back, frightened by his intensity. The young beggar explains that Mount Hua lost its techniques and masters during the Great War against the demonic cult years ago. Chung Myung realizes that his brother's sacrifice was not honored, but rather used by others to rise to absolute power. The rage is now cold and deep, a silent promise of vengeance against all who allowed Mount Hua to fall into oblivion. He looks to the horizon, where the xianxia mountains rise, calling him back home to cleanse the dishonor from its name. But first, he needs to deal with the immediate obstacles, starting with the body that can barely stand on this cold afternoon. The dark-haired beggar tries to offer advice, but Chung Myung is no longer listening. His mind is miles away. He walks away from the group, each step a battle against physical weakness and the pain still radiating from his recent injuries. He reaches the edge of a stream, seeing his reflection in the crystal clear water for the first time since he woke up in this strange new life. The face staring back at him is young, gaunt, and scarred from a harsh life on the streets, nothing like the hero he once was. He touches his own face, feeling the soft skin of a child who never knew the true weight of a steel sword. It's a disconcerting sight, a constant reminder that he will have to journey a long way to regain his former splendor and strength. He plunges his head into the cold water, trying to wash away the dirt and confusion that cloud his senses and current judgment. Chung Myung rises, water streaming down his face, his eyes now fixed on a single goal, the total restoration of Mount Hua. Other beggars watch from afar, commenting on the strange behavior of the boy they thought they knew so well until now. He ignores the whispers, focused on sensing the energy of nature around him, trying to find a way to accelerate his martial development. He begins to perform basic movements, the muscle memory of his soul trying to translate itself to this new clumsy young body. It's a slow and frustrating process, but he possesses the patience of one who has lived centuries and the determination of a sword saint. The dark-haired beggar approaches again, perhaps feeling a strange attraction to the energy now beginning to emanate from Chung Myung. They exchange few words, but a new silent respect grows between them, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary is happening here. Chung Myung decides it's time to leave. He cannot waste any more time living as a beggar while his sect suffers in abandonment. He faces the young green-haired beggar, demanding to know the exact date and how much time had truly passed since Chunma's fall. Upon hearing that it has been exactly 100 years, his world stops. An entire century of history has been written without his presence. 100 years. Enough time for empires to fall and new legends to be forged upon the lies of a glorious past. He laughs, a dry, joyless laugh, realizing the cruel irony of being brought back when everything he loved is already gone. But the laughter soon transforms into a look of pure determination. If the world has forgotten him, he will make sure to be remembered again. He asks about the map of Xianxia province, needing to locate the vestiges of what remained of his old sect's properties. The green-haired youth hesitates, but the intensity in Chung Myung's gaze compels him to share the information he possesses. They discuss the locations of the 10 great sects, and Chung Myung is horrified to see that Mount Hua isn't even on the updated list. How is this possible? He roars, feeling fury bubble up again at seeing mediocre names occupying the place that belongs to his brothers. The map of the martial world is now dominated by opportunists and descendants of those who fled while he fought on the front lines. The green-haired beggar tries to calm him, but it's like trying to put out a forest fire with just a mug of lukewarm water. Chung Myung decides he will see with his own eyes. He will go to Mount Hua, even if he has to crawl across the entire province to get there. The green-haired youth warns him of the dangers of the road and of the bullies who control the region's begging routes. But the Sword Saint merely smiles, a dangerous glint in his eyes, suggesting that the bullies are the ones who should be very worried. He prepares to depart, ignoring the protests of those who had seen him beaten just hours earlier in this very spot. His feet touch the ground with new firmness, each step a solemn vow that the glory of the plum blossom will shine again. He begins to run, the wind whipping through his dark hair as he leaves behind the life of a beggar, heading towards his epic destiny. His gaze is fixed on the horizon, where Mount Hua's peak hides among the clouds, awaiting the return of its true master. However, the physical reality of his body strikes him again. He stumbles, his stamina almost non-existent at this initial stage of his journey. He face-plants into the dirt, dust filling his mouth and lungs, a humiliating reminder that will alone does not conquer biology. In the distance, a forgotten tomb seems to observe his struggle, a silent symbol of all the heroes whom time has tried, unsuccessfully, to erase. Chung Myung rises with difficulty, wiping blood and dirt from his scraped knees, refusing to accept defeat so soon. He glares at the path ahead with renewed fury. The journey to rebuild Mount Hua has begun, and nothing in this world can stop him now. He gets up. The pride of a sword saint does not allow him to rot on the ground like any commoner. A golden opportunity arises amidst the chaos. He has the chance to start from scratch, armed with all the knowledge of a legend. Memories of past lives float like petals of times when training was the only law and rest a distant luxury. He recalls the beatings from his Young, the punishments for laziness, and the days when the sword was his only faithful companion. He drank in secret, shirked responsibilities, but his innate talent was something no one, not even time, could take from him. Now, all of that is merely an echo of a glory the world seems to have buried under lies and neglect. He steps firmly into the forest, each stride a silent oath that the plum blossom will once again bloom with unparalleled might. He needs absolute isolation, a place where the distractions of the martial world cannot interfere with his necessary spiritual awakening. This place serves. The silence among the ancient trees is the perfect stage for the beginning of his epic rebirth. What to learn first? The knowledge is vast, but the foundation is what sustains the highest peak of the mountain. He sits, spine erect, and begins to control his breathing, which was once erratic and heavy with exhaustion. The wind blows, the leaves dance, and nature itself seems to recognize the presence of an ancient and powerful soul. A single leaf falls softly upon his head, sealing the eternal pact between the reborn warrior and relentless destiny. Balance, his dantian begins to pulsate, seeking the lost harmony between good and evil within his soul. He remembers the cheap manuals sold at fairs, mediocre techniques that don't hold a candle to the secret he carries. Gold and worldly coins cannot buy what he is about to forge within his veins with chi. The technique is far from basic. It is the pure essence of what made Mount Hua the absolute sovereign of the Great Mountains. Every new disciple began precisely here, yet few understood the true and terrifying depth of these millennia-old roots of the sect. He envisions the grandeur of the sect in his mind, the imposing structure that once dominated the horizon with its glory. Blue energy begins to snake through his arms, a spectral glow cutting through the forest's gloom like a blade. Veins bulge beneath his young skin, charged with a power that a child's body can barely contain. The tree behind him seems to vibrate in resonance, absorbing the overflowing aura of this little monster who has just awakened. Chi flows like an untamed river, mapping every internal pathway and rebuilding what was broken by his previous death. At the core of his being, the dantian glows with divine intensity, becoming the nucleus of his new and vast world. The sphere of energy finally stabilizes, spinning like a vortex of pure light in the deep void of his stomach. It is done! The foundation has been laid, the solid bedrock for a reborn legend that will make the entire land tremble again. A small spark now, but one that will soon transform into an unstoppable avalanche of unprecedented martial power in the world. He opens his eyes, and the glint in them does not belong to a child. It is the hungry gaze of an ancient predator. But physical reality is cruel. As he tries to stand, his body fails, and he collapses pathetically onto the dirty ground. The exhaustion is absolute and overwhelming. He forgot he expended every last drop of vital energy in his deep meditation. Damn it! He grumbles irritably, the mind of a supreme master trapped in a body that can barely support its own weight. His Sayoung's voice echoes in his mind, laughing at his momentary stupidity and lack of basic planning. He tells the vision to go to hell. Irritation boils in his blood as he tries to regain his lost breath. In the nearby market, life follows its ignorant course, with merchants shouting loudly and people living their small, mediocre lives. Three shadowy figures approach, exuding the stench of those who live in gutters and feed only on the fear of others. A wounded beggar watches from afar with dread, knowing that the neighborhood's bloodthirsty bullies have found a new, defenseless prey. The three figures suddenly stop, led by a brute whose face is marred by gratuitous malice and ignorance. The bald leader spits on the ground with contempt, looking at the boy as if he were just an easy target. He demands to know who gave that small intruder permission to beg in his sacred territory of beggary and filth. His cronies laugh loudly, anticipating the sadistic moment they will crush the fragile bones of that insolent, dirty child. Chung Myung doesn't even look back. He calmly continues eating his bread, ignoring the imminent threat of death. The thugs immediately erupt in fury. They'd never seen such a young beggar show such utter and absolute disrespect to his superiors. "Hey, brat!" the furious leader shouts, the vein in his neck throbbing with pure rage beneath his sweaty skin. The boy's silence is like a violent slap in the face to those scoundrels who believe they own the street. They position themselves in a circle, surrounding the small figure who seems to have no idea of the danger he's in. The leader asks mockingly if he's deaf, his voice laden with suffocating, vile aggression directed at the boy. Finally, Chung Myung slowly turns his face, mouth full, with a look of pure and absolute deadly boredom. "Are you talking to me?" he asks calmly, his voice sounding strangely cold for someone in such a dangerous situation. He questions the brute's informal tone, as if he were an emperor interrupted by a dirty, insignificant commoner. The thugs completely lose their minds. They think the boy has simply gone insane from so much hunger and extreme misery. The leader says he'll let him go, but only if he hands over everything he has and disappears from there. Chung Myung looks at the leftover food in his hand, an expression of absolute disbelief and mockery on his face. He calls the three of them shameless vagabonds, humiliating them in front of anyone who wished to hear that raw, naked truth. Rage boils in the criminals' stomachs. The boundless audacity of that child is something they can never forgive. He slowly stands, brushing the dust from his torn clothes with a dignity that doesn't belong in that filthy street. Then he begins to stretch his arms unhurriedly, completely ignoring the crude insults hurled at his small figure. Are all three of you coming at once, or do I need to draw you a picture? He provokes, the dangerous, lethal glint returning to his eyes. The bald brute grinds his teeth forcefully, the sound of bone clattering against bone echoing in the tense silence. Kill this brat now, he orders with hatred, and the two henchmen charge like rabid, hungry dogs. The first throws a heavy punch, a brutal blow that should have broken the neck of any ordinary child. But the fist strikes only air. The Plum Blossom Sword Saint moves like a fluid, untouchable shadow. Chung Myung's gaze is icy and sharp, the kind of look that could freeze blood in veins. With a swift, precise movement, he seizes the aggressor's wrist and twists it with terrifying ease. The sound of impact is dry and brutal, and the thug flies backward like an old sack of potatoes. He stops before the terrified leader, the aura around him becoming suffocating, heavy, and almost unbearable to perceive. I am the Plum Blossom Saint, he roars, his voice laden with ancient divine power. In seconds, the three bullies are kneeling on the dirt, trembling with a terror they'd never felt in their despicable lives. The leader weeps profusely, begging forgiveness as he stares at the small monster who has just utterly humiliated him. Chung Myung calls him Beggar Chief, but the tone is laden with a biting sarcasm that pierces the soul. The boy's hands are ready to strike again if the given answer isn't precisely what he expects. He demands to know the fastest route to xianxia province, to the sacred place where his sect rests. The thug, his face swollen and disfigured, looks confused at the boy who seems to know too much for his age. He tries to laugh nervously, saying that mere beggars don't know about geographic routes or such distant noble destinations. But the smile dies instantly upon seeing the dark, deadly expression that now crosses Chung Myung's face. It seems I've barked up the wrong tree, he says coldly, a dry, joyless laugh escaping him. He seizes the leader by the collar forcefully, pulling him close until their eyes are mere inches apart. The warning is deadly. If they meet again, the thug had better have all the right answers. Get out of here before I change my mind, he roars furiously, and the three flee like frightened rats. He watches the cowards flee inside. The current martial world has truly fallen into mediocre, dishonorable hands. In the distance, the peak of Mount Hua rises among the clouds, majestic and indifferent to the cruel passage of time. A white-bearded elder observes the distant horizon, perhaps sensing a subtle, powerful shift in the cold wind. He appears deeply troubled, carrying the unbearable weight of a sect that is merely on life support today. The doors of the main estate are worn, the old wood creaking like a mournful lament for bygone glories. A man with a mustache approaches the elder, bringing news that is likely the worst possible for the sect. They converse in low, disheartened tones surrounded by a heavy atmosphere of decay, dust, and profound sadness. The elder's hands tremble slightly beneath his robes. He knows that the definitive end may be closer today. Meanwhile, Chung Myung begins his arduous climb, each step a slow torture for his underdeveloped childlike muscles. The sun begins to set on the horizon, painting the sky with the vibrant colors of the ancient plum blossom. Finally, he reaches the mountaintop, gasping for breath and leaning on a rotten stick that served as a makeshift cane. I finally made it, he mutters, his heart pounding so hard it feels like it wants to leap from his tired chest. But as he looks up with hope, shock hits him like a monstrous punch straight to the gut. The place where the sect's main plaque should shine is empty, only a dark mark on the old wood. Where did it go? He roars with fury, pain, and indignation mingling in a silent scream. He remembers his Sa Young proudly cleaning that plaque every morning with unwavering care and love. The absence of that sacred symbol is as if a vital piece of his very warrior soul has been ripped away. He begins to have a nervous breakdown, screaming at the heavens about the gross incompetence of his successors. A side door opens and a man in dark clothes appears, looking strangely at the beggar boy. "Who's screaming out there?" he asks, his voice echoing sadly in the silent, empty, and utterly neglected courtyard. The man looks at the ragged child and can't comprehend how they climbed that perilous mountain alone. Chung Myung tries to disguise his simmering rage, but his eyes still spark with pure, ancient indignation. He asks with authority if the man before him is truly a martial arts practitioner of Mount Hua. The man confirms with a nod, but his gaze is vague and sorrowful, devoid of the flame a true warrior possesses. At least the sect hasn't completely vanished from the face of the earth, Chung Myung thinks, feeling a bitter relief. The man invites him in out of charity. They can't let a child spend the night in the deadly cold. Mount Hua becomes freezing when darkness falls, and hospitality is still a rule, even amidst their misery. But upon crossing the sacred gate, Chung Myung stops abruptly, his jaw dropping in absolute, paralyzing horror. The training courtyard's ground, once noble, is just packed dirt, loose stones, and accumulated mud. Why is the ground made of dirt? He asks in shock, his voice failing before that decadent and sorrowful sight. What happened to the white marble floor? He insists, feeling the urge to shake the man by the shoulders. The disciple explains with evident shame that they had to sell the noble stones to pay urgent debts. Sell the sect's very ground? Chung Myung feels like he's going to collapse right there, in the middle of the courtyard. He tries to calm himself by force, repeating that they are just stones, but the historical humiliation is simply too immense. The man tries to be gentle, commenting that the courtyard is still very spacious and remains good for training. But the final, devastating blow comes immediately after, when he looks to the top of the inner hill. Where the majestic golden heavenly palace should stand, there is only a desolate, gray, and overgrown wasteland. Where did it go? He points, his finger trembling with a rage that already borders on utter madness. The disciple says the palace collapsed many years ago, and they never had the minimum resources to properly rebuild it. Chung Myung laughs bitterly, a hysterical laugh that makes the other man recoil 2 steps, visibly frightened. The man says all of it are wounds of glory, sacrifices made in times of extreme need and war. Glory my ass! Chung Myung mutters through clenched teeth, his face darkening into a silent and very dangerous fury. The disciple asks if he said anything important, but the boy just shakes his head negatively, feigning calm. They proceed into the sect's interior, passing decrepit pavilions that seem ready to collapse at any moment. Each step taken is a pang of physical pain at seeing his home treated with such shameful neglect. The man patiently explains that guests have duties to fulfill while remaining under the sect's protection. They finally arrive at Yuyuan Temple, a place that was once the sacred center of their spiritual life. The old door creaks loudly as it opens, revealing a dark interior, heavy with the scent of cheap incense. Go ahead and prepare to pay your due respects to our ancestors, the man says with seriousness. Chung Myung enters slowly, feeling the overwhelming weight of the history he himself helped write a century ago. But his eyes lock immediately on the main altar, and he feels like the world has stopped spinning now. It's not here, it's gone, he whispers, terror and disbelief etched onto his face in shock. He frantically begins searching for a specific item, something that defined the very sacred soul of that place. He vividly remembers the plum blossom carved from precious white metal that adorned the center of the ancient temple. It was an eternal symbol of purity and resilience, something that shone brightly even on the sect's darkest night. He starts rummaging through old things, desperately asking where the flower that should have been protected there is. The disciple looks confused and suspicious. How could a street kid know about such an ancient decorative detail? A flower? Oh yes, there was a flower made of strange white metal here once, he recalls. Chung Myung holds his breath for a second, hoping for an answer that will bring some peace to his heart. We sold it to a merchant, the man says with a simple smile, as if it were the most natural thing. He says they saw no practical use for it, and a merchant offered a good price, so they closed the profitable deal. Chung Myung's world completely collapses. He falls to his knees on the cold floor of the utterly forgotten temple. Sa-hyung. Our sect truly went bankrupt, he thinks with bitterness, tears of frustration finally threatening to escape. His feet touch the ground, and he feels the profound shame of being a descendant of these visionless idiots. The man quickly approaches, concerned by the sudden and dramatic collapse of such a strange and intense child. But Chung Myung never gives up. He grabs the disciple's arm with superhuman strength that surprises him. Please, take me to the sect leader right now, he demands, his voice trembling with absolute urgency. The disciple hesitates for an instant, but the supernatural intensity in the beggar's gaze compels him to obey promptly. He finally realizes he's not dealing with an ordinary child, but with something powerful he doesn't understand. They quickly cross the corridors until they reach the simple chambers where ancestors are honored in a rather precarious manner. A dragon statue observes the scene in silence, a symbol of power that now seems merely a memory. The man knocks on the wooden door, formally announcing that a strange child is asking to speak with the leader. Unam? Leader Hyunjong's voice echoes, curious and visibly tired, from inside the silent chamber. The disciple enters, bringing with him the small human hurricane about to change the fate of everyone there. The leader looks at young Chung Myung, surprised to see such a small and absurdly determined boy. He calmly asks what a child would be doing alone on that desolate mountain, forgotten by the entire world. Chung Myung performs the traditional martial salute, his fist striking with a dry sound that cuts through the heavy silence. "Respectful greetings, great sect leader," he bellows, his voice laden with a millennia-old authority that shocks everyone. "My name is Chung Myung, and I officially wish to join the great Mount Hua Sect right now," he declares. Internally, he's laughing with fury to keep from crying as he sees the elder's expression of utter confusion. The sect leader, Hyunjong, looks deeply at the boy, processing that completely unexpected and very audacious request. He sadly explains that they are no longer accepting anyone, and that the place has nothing left. But Chung Myung just smiles back, a dangerous glint in his eyes that promises to rebuild every piece of that glory. The journey to restore the Plum Blossom has only just begun, and the martial world will tremble before the master's return. "I wish to join the Mount Hua Sect," he shouts to the heavens, his heart beating like a war drum in the darkness. The scene shifts to the present, where plum blossom petals fall upon leader Hyunjong and disciple Un-am. The white-bearded elder studies the beggar boy, asking if he truly understands the weight of the name he is now invoking. Chung Myung holds his gaze firm, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that makes the veterans instinctively take a step back, intimidated. Inside, he smiles with bitter disdain, knowing that no one there has half the strength he once possessed. Unam watches the boy's back, feeling that the mountain's destiny has just been sealed by that small, noisy intruder. They walk along the desolate paths, where weeds grow between the stones that once gleamed beneath the feet of legendary sect heroes. Meanwhile, on the training ground, the sound of wooden swords cutting through the air reveals the absolute weakness of the current new generation. The reincarnated Sword Saint cannot hide his disgust. He sees the technique being executed sloppily and utterly lifelessly. He thinks this is an insult to my ancestors, as his mind boils with plans for brutal reforms and immediate changes to it all. Hyunjong sighs deeply, the kindness on his face being the only thing left of the dignity of that almost extinct martial school. The elder looks at disciple Un-am and young Chung Myung, processing the audacity of such a sudden and strange request. "I approve your entry into the sect," says the leader with a calm smile that deeply shocks the boy at that precise moment of tension. Chung Myung's world stops for a second. He expected a challenge, a trial by fire, something worthy of his legend. Huh? How can you accept me without even testing me, he thinks, feeling a vain throb in his forehead in pure frustration. The boy shouts in indignation, while Un-am and the leader exchange looks of pure confusion at the child's atypical reaction. The elder merely smiles serenely, explaining that he changed his mind because he saw the desperate sincerity in the beggar child's eyes there. He continues his kind sermon, saying that one should not ignore a bird seeking shelter from the rain under the house's roof. Chung Myung wants to die of shame. He's being treated like a helpless little animal by the very descendants he came to save from ruin. The leader insists that Mount Hua welcomes all who seek the path with their heart, ignoring the little boy's fury. Unam bozos respectfully, accepting the order to prepare quarters for the newest and most problematic disciple of the sacred mountain. Inside, the Sword Saint is screaming, "You should be more wary of strangers, you idiots with no sense of real danger." But the decision is made, and destiny now places him within the walls he himself helped erect centuries ago. He is led through the corridors, and each creaking floorboard under his feet seems like a lament for glories forgotten by relentless time. NM explains that he will stay in the White Plum Blossom House, the dormitory designated for third-class novice disciples. Upon receiving the official uniform, Chung Myung feels a bitter weight on his shoulders. He, a living legend, is now a mere novice. He observes the flower symbol on his chest, an emblem he once defended with blood, which now feels like nothing more than cheap cloth. "I'll have to start from absolute zero," he sighs, as discouragement tries, without success, to shatter his unwavering and eternal iron will. The room is simple, decrepit, and cold, yet for him it evokes memories of a time when the halls overflowed with vibrant energy. He ventures out to explore the silent corridor, where the sounds of the night are broken only by whispers drifting from neighboring rooms within the building. Curiosity leads him to peek through a crack, where he sees other youths resting, completely unaware of the hurricane that has just arrived. Suddenly, a face emerges from the darkness. It's Joe Ghoul, a disciple who seems anything but pleased by the strange newcomer's presence. "Who are you to be peeking into other people's rooms?" Joe Ghoul roars, his bully's aura attempting to intimidate the young boy standing there. At this, other disciples emerge to witness the commotion, surrounding Chung Myung with looks of superiority and evident disdain etched on every young face. Joe Ghoul demands if he's a thief, his voice laden with cheap aggression that only makes Chung Myung want to laugh. The whispers grow louder as the group scrutinizes the beggar who now wears the same uniform as them, a fact that seems to deeply offend them. Yoonjong, the eldest among them, approaches with a severe expression, trying to understand what caused such an uproar in the cold night. At this, Joe Ghoul aggressively points his finger, accusing the boy of snooping and demanding that he immediately learn his place before his seniors. Chung Myung merely observes in silence, his mind calculating 1,000 ways to take them all down in less than 10 seconds, if he so wished. "Why do I have to endure these trials with mere brats?" he thinks, his patience draining like sand from an old hourglass. An authoritative voice then cuts through the air. "Silence! What is the meaning of all this racket in the dormitory now?" And all the disciples immediately freeze. It's Ungum, the instructor responsible for order, who emerges like an imposing shadow at the end of the dark, silent corridor. Joe Ghoul and the others bow hastily, their fear of the instructor outweighing their desire to beat up the newcomer. Ungum reprimands the group, reminding them that rest hours have already begun, and they should be sleeping for morning training. The instructor then fixes his eyes on Chung Myung, who remains still, showing no sign of fear or submission to the master. "Ah, so you are the newcomer the leader spoke of," Ungum says, his voice losing a bit of its initial harshness. The boy merely nods, while Joe Ghoul casts a chilling glare at him from behind, promising vengeance as soon as the instructor leaves. Ungum orders everyone back to their beds and tells the newcomer to rest for his first official day of training tomorrow. At this, the group quickly disperses, but the tension in the air remains vibrant, like a bowstring about to snap. Joe Ghoul stops beside Chung Myung and whispers, "I'll deal with you later, you trash," before vanishing into the shadows. The Sword Saint lets out a short, grim chuckle. He adores it when victims come to him of their own accord and risk. Night falls heavy upon the mountain, and the silence of the Mount Hua Sect is merely a facade for the coming chaos. Chung Myung lies on his hard mattress, staring at the ceiling and recalling how luxurious the rooms were in his golden era. "These brats don't know what respect is. But I'll teach them. Oh yes, I will," he mutters before closing his tired eyes. Hours later, amidst the complete darkness of the dormitory, the sound of light footsteps approaches the boy's door with ill intent. Joe Ghoul and 3 other disciples stealthily enter, carrying cloths and sticks, ready to give the newcomer the infamous welcome hazing. They surround the bed in silence, but the instant they try to attack, their target is simply no longer there, as if he evaporated into thin air. A shiver runs down Joe Ghoul's spine as he feels a hand lightly rest on his shoulder, coming directly from behind him. "Looking for someone?" Chung Myung's voice whispers like a demon into the now utterly terrified disciple's ear. Before they can react, the boy moves like a blur of light, delivering precise strikes that disarm the aggressors in a single instant. Joe Ghoul tries to retaliate with a desperate punch, but Chung Myung blocks it effortlessly, his eyes gleaming with malicious pleasure. The impact is brutal. Joe Ghoul is hurled against the wooden wall, which cracks under the weight of his fallen body. The other 3 disciples retreat, their legs trembling as they witness the helpless newcomer, emanating a suffocating pressure, almost a monstrous aura. "Is this all Mount Hua has to offer these days?" he asks, his voice laden with deep disappointment. He advances again, and the sound of cracking bones and muffled screams fills the small room as he cleans house. In a few minutes, the bullies are all piled on the floor, groaning in pain and utterly unable to stand or react. Chung Myung calmly sits on one of their backs and coldly orders them to start spilling everything about the current sect. Joe Ghoul, his face swollen and bruised, begs for mercy, realizing he's not dealing with an ordinary child, but with something far darker. "Who are you really?" asks Yoonjong, who watched everything from the doorway, paralyzed by shock and pure terror. The boy merely smiles and says he's just a novice Saiti who's eager to learn, ironically mocking the pathetic situation of his superiors. He demands to know why the sect is in ruins and who is responsible for selling off every shred of Mount Hua's dignity. As the group trembles before him, Chung Myung feels a pang of pain upon hearing about the fires and past losses. The image of the sect in flames flashes in his mind, the same bloody vision that haunted him at the moment of his heroic death. He finally realizes that the fall was not just financial, but spiritual. The very soul of the mountain warriors was cruelly ripped away. I will rebuild this place, even if I have to break every single one of your bones in the process, he silently promises himself. The conversation continues late into the night, with the Sword Saint extracting every useful piece of information from those now utterly submissive third-class disciples. He discovers with horror that the sacred techniques have been lost or corrupted, transformed into weak, purposeless versions devoid of true martial intent. Hatred burns in his chest upon hearing that the original scriptures were sold off or are rotting away due to a lack of competent masters. But he finds an opportunity in this tragedy. If the field is cleared of masters, he can plant any seeds he wishes there. The next morning, Chung Myung appears in the refectory, eating calmly, while Jo-gul and the others serve him like terrified servants. A bearded veteran finds the scene odd, seeing the third-class disciples acting obediently towards the newcomer they just met. He asks what's going on, but Jo-gul merely averts his gaze, sweating coldly and visibly trembling before the small figure. The atmosphere within the sect subtly begins to shift, an unknown shadow of authority starting to project itself over all the young disciples. Chung Myung finishes his meal and wipes his mouth, his eyes already fixed on the main training grounds that await him. He gestures for Jo-gul to follow, and the poor disciple obeys instantly, like a dog fearing the heavy whip. The bearded veteran remains behind, scratching his head and sensing that something profoundly dangerous and ancient has just taken root there. Upon arriving at the training grounds, the Sword Saint observes the students positioning themselves for the first lesson of the sunny day. Ungum, the instructor, takes command and orders everyone to begin practicing the basic wooden sword movements. Chung Myung watches with a hand on his chin, an expression of pure boredom and sarcasm plastered across his mischievous child's face. He sees loose arms, poorly positioned legs, and a complete lack of murderous intent in every strike delivered against the wind. Wake up to life, he wants to shout, but decides that observing the disaster a little longer will be far more instructive now. His eyes catch every flaw, every incorrect breath, cataloging the incompetence of each of his new sect Saiyungs. He sits in a corner, ignoring orders to join the line, acting as if he were the legitimate owner of the place. Ungum notices the obvious insubordination and walks up to him, his patience being tested early in the training morning. "Why aren't you training, newcomer?" the instructor asks, expecting a flimsy excuse from some lazy child. Chung Myung points at the others and simply states that what they are doing is not martial arts. It's a dance. The ensuing silence is deadly. No one had ever dared to insult the sect's training so directly and brutally. The students stop moving, their eyes wide as they wait for Ungum to explode in rage against the presumptuous youngster. But the Sword Saint continues, explaining in technical terms that the foundation of their balance is completely wrong and without focus. Ungum is perplexed. The boy is using terms that only high-level masters should know and command with such perfection. To prove his point, Chung Myung picks up a wooden sword and executes a single movement, simple yet imbued with absolute power. The sound of air being torn is like thunder, and the sword's tip stops millimeters from the static instructor's face. Everyone in the courtyard holds their breath. The aura emanating from that child is that of a fierce predator at the top of the food chain. "This is Mount Hua," he states, dropping the sword to the ground with a dry clatter that echoes throughout the mountain. He turns and walks away, leaving a trail of confusion and genuine fear in every disciple who watches him depart. Yoon-jong tries to say something, but the words die in his throat before the boy's deep crimson gaze. Chung Myung's feet leave faint marks in the sand, but the impact he left on their minds is permanent and dark. Instructor Ungum looks at his own trembling hand, realizing that what he had just witnessed was the perfection of technique. The boy now walks through the gardens, reflecting on how the balance technique has been distorted to be too safe and easy today. He realizes that the old masters removed the difficulty to attract more students, but in doing so, they also removed its true effectiveness. They turned a war sword into a child's toy, he thinks with a bitterness that almost makes him weep. He sees a group of students chatting and decides that the leniency is over. If they want to be disciples, they will suffer as such now. The Sword Saint begins to dictate orders to Jo-gul, transforming the former bully into his official messenger of bad news. He orders everyone to gather in the courtyard at 5 a.m., a time no one there had ever considered for training before. Anyone who doesn't show up will wish they were never born, he warns with a smile that instantly chills Jogul's blood. The news spreads through the dormitory like wildfire, and fear of the newcomer overrides any desire for rebellion or silly complaints. The students spend the afternoon whispering, trying to understand how a mere brat took control of the entire third class so quickly. Yoon Jong, acting as the sensible leader, tries to calm the spirits, but even he knows that tomorrow will be a terrible day. Chung Myung watches the moon rise, meditating to stabilize his chi and prepare his weak body for the exertion that will come tomorrow. He knows that the path to restoring the glory of the plum blossom will be paved with their sweat and blood. They will hate me today, but they will thank me when the petals fall with force once more, he reflects in silence. The dormitory building remains in absolute silence, but no one can sleep, anxiety weighing like lead upon the wooden beds. The sect's dark roof watches over the mountain as the reincarnated master plans every detail of the torture, the new training. He calls Yoon Jong for a private conversation, wanting to understand the internal hierarchy and who the true pillars of the sect are. The brown-haired veteran responds sincerely, seeing that the boy possesses a vision that transcends his apparent physical age. Chung Myung asks about other techniques, such as the Seven Sages' sword and the legendary technique he knew in the past. Yoon Jong explains that these techniques are either considered legends or kept locked away, deemed too dangerous for the current disciples. The boy feels an urge to bang his head against the wall. What they call danger, he calls essential basic power. He discovers that Mount Hua has lost its prestige to the other sects in the province, becoming a laughingstock in tournaments. So that's why you act like losers, he states, his voice cutting like a freshly sharpened steel blade in the cold. Yoon Jong lowers his head, the shame of his own weakness exposed by someone so small yet so ruthless. But the Sword Saint places a hand on his shoulder and declares that from tomorrow onward, no one will dare laugh at them again. The glint in Chung Myung's eyes is terrifying, promising a rebirth that will be felt across the entire marine martial world. A close-up on his eye reveals an ancient flame of determination that never extinguished, not even with his past physical death. The figure of the Sword Saint seems to project behind the boy, a shadow of power that would make entire armies retreat. He turns to the window, observing the slumbering sect and whispering the names of his fallen brothers as if asking for permission. Sahyung, I will make the impossible happen. Watch from the heavens as I mend what you all allowed to break over all these years. The scene cuts to 5 a.m., the sky still tinged with dark blue and the mountains cold, biting at the skin. In the courtyard, disciples begin to appear, yawning and shivering, some barely able to keep their eyes open from accumulated sleep. A blue sash veteran complains loudly, asking what kind of newcomer dares to give orders to the seniors. A red sash disciple agrees, irritation visible on her tired face marked by a restless night. The group huddles together, most still believing this is a bad joke that will soon be resolved. The man in white robes looks around, but the commander of this gathering has yet to show his face in the courtyard. Whispers grow louder. Some suggest simply returning to bed and ignoring the cheeky brat who summoned them in this cold. Who does he think he is? A legendary master? The girl scoffs, unaware that her joke is closer to the absolute truth than she knows. The disciples' arrogance is fueled by their exhaustion, creating an atmosphere of rebellion that is about to be mercilessly crushed. They prepare to leave, but the sound of rhythmic, heavy footsteps begins to echo from the central dormitory corridor. The red sash girl stops talking as she feels the air pressure shift, as if an invisible weight has fallen upon her. The group falls silent instantly. Their survival instinct has finally triggered a maximum, highly urgent alert. A shadow emerges at the gate, and Chung Myung's small silhouette stands out against the faint light of the dawning morning. He walks slowly, hands clasped behind his back, observing each person present with a gaze that seems to pierce their very souls. The blue sash veteran tries to say something, but the boy merely raises a finger, demanding absolute silence with a single gesture. The courtyard becomes so quiet you can hear the ragged breathing of the disciples, who are now genuinely terrified of him. I'm glad everyone came, Chung Myung says, his calm voice more menacing than any uncontrolled shout of fury. He walks between the ranks, correcting a disciple's posture with a touch that seems to carry the weight of a mountain. The red sash girl tries to retreat, but he stops before her, his icy gaze freezing any attempt at movement. Today, you will learn what it means to be a true disciple of the Mount Hua Sect, he declares solemnly to all. His feet strike the ground with force, and the impact creates a small crack in the stone, demonstrating an absurd control of chi. He orders everyone to grab their swords and prepare for the most hellish training that has ever existed on this mountain. The disciples scramble to obey, fear being the greatest motivator they have ever felt in their entire mediocre lives. Chung Myung smiles, a dangerous, excited glint in his eyes as he watches the beginning of his home's reconstruction. Hell on earth is just beginning for the disciples, but for Mount Hua, the sun is finally starting to shine again. Ungum sighs heavily, imagining that the senior disciples were too hard on the newcomer, perhaps an exaggerated reception to test the poor boy. But curiosity overcomes him. The man slowly walks towards the courtyard, expecting to find the small orphan humbled or cleaning the floor. He plans to teach the disciples a lesson for going too far. After all, Jo-gul and Yoon-jong should know how to maintain order. Ungum stops dead at the gate, his eyes widening in shock as what he sees defies all established logic. The Mount Hua Sect's courtyard looks like a battlefield. Elite disciples strewn across the ground, groaning for mercy and their mothers. They are utterly broken, uniforms stained with dirt, and sweat pouring down like rivers of pure despair as they beg for it to end. The instructor screams in horror, his voice failing as he sees his pupils in such deplorable conditions, but no one has the strength to even reply. The fear in the student's eyes is palpable, a deep psychological scar that only a truly cruel monster could have inflicted. He demands immediate explanations, his aura of authority trying to conceal his internal tremor before this scene of absolute and inexplicable chaos. Then he spots Jo-gul. The impulsive senior is a wreck, clutching a wooden sword as if it were a last cane. But the real shock comes right behind, a small shirtless figure, bearing the weight of two massive mountains on his back. It's Chung Myung. The boy's muscles are tense, as steel veins bulging under his skin as he maintains an almost impossible balance. Every movement is a dance with pure suffering, the rope groaning under the pressure of gigantic rocks that would crush any ordinary man. The little monster is focused and icy, ignoring the searing pain as his legs tremble violently against the wooden floor. Sweat evaporates from his heated body with rhythmic breaths, a display of chi control that Ungum had never witnessed in such a young disciple. The grinding sound of the stone echoes in the deadly silence, a constant reminder that the training here has reached a level of pure insanity. 10,085, he counts with a firm voice, even as his lungs burn as if engulfed in infernal flames. Ungum is paralyzed. The image of Chung Myung surpassing all known human limits is something that will be etched into his very soul. The boy slowly squats, the immense pressure making the courtyard planks creak under the colossal weight he proudly sustains. It is a brutal display of raw strength and unwavering will that makes the instructor seriously question everything he has taught until today. Chung Myung's face is a mask of determination. He is no child. He is a legendary martial beast finally awakened. He releases the stones with a crash that shakes the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust that envelops his almost heroic figure. As the dust settles, he remains standing, though his legs threaten to give out at any moment under that truly superhuman effort. He looks at Ungum and greets him casually, as if he hadn't just performed a physical miracle of endurance. The instructor approaches cautiously, his heart pounding in his throat as he observes the deplorable yet magnificent physical state of this strange boy. The man is in complete shock. The boy's legs tremble so violently that the sound of the tremor is almost audible in the silent courtyard. He orders fresh water brought immediately, fearing that the new disciple might die of exhaustion before his very frightened eyes. But Chung Myung merely accepts the bowl with a certain disdain, downing the liquid in a single gulp as he regains his lost breath. Water streams down his chin, washing the dust from a face that hides the shrewd mind of a centuries-old martial master. He finishes drinking and looks around, seeing the seniors still crawling like terrified worms across the cold, hard stone ground. "It was nothing much," he says with a cynical smile, downplaying the hell he created for those poor souls during the night. He explains they decided to have a small morning exercise together, a lie so blatant it sends shivers down the disciples' spines. He claims everyone was too excited, pushing their limits willingly to restore the lost glory of the ancient Mount Hua Sect. The students look at him in horror, waving their hands in silent denial, begging Ungum not to believe such madness. They are terrified. Their fear of the boy is greater than their respect for the instructor, keeping them in cowardly, shameful silence. Ungum watches the bizarre scene. The contrast between the smiling brat and the whimpering veteran warriors is almost comical. The master considers giving a severe warning, punishing such insolence, but something in Chung Myung's aura makes him hesitate. He realizes that the third-class disciples are genuinely terrified of a newcomer who has just arrived on this sacred mountain. If he intervenes now and admits that the novice dominates them, it will make the entire sect look like a bunch of fools. Ungum falls into a deep moral dilemma, hand on his face, trying to process how a single boy has turned the order upside down here. He would see himself as the biggest idiot if he admitted he had no control over what happens under his own roof. 1 month, Chung Myung proposes with a challenging glint in his eyes, breaking the silence with a promise that sounds like a prophecy. He asks for just 30 days to show results that will make the martial world tremble before Mount Hua's name once more. He guarantees he will bear real fruit, molding those idiots into warriors worthy of bearing the plum blossom symbol on their robes. He praises the false determination of his seniors, a cutting irony that makes Jogul want to vomit from sheer frustration and exhaustion. The boy raises his fist, feigning contagious enthusiasm, while the other disciples merely agree, fearing another monumental beating. Ungum looks at that young man and wonders where on earth such confidence and hidden power came from within such a small body. He seriously questions why the boy insists so much on sacrificing his sleep and health for such brutal training. Chung Myung replies that the master's teaching is excellent, but that extra effort is what separates the mediocre from legends. He says that respect for their seniors demands they train to the extreme limit, treating their words as divine commands. It's a perfect psychological game. He inflates the instructor's ego while maintaining absolute control over his roommates. Ungum smiles, convinced by the manipulative rhetoric and the apparent fervor that finally seems to have emerged in his previously lazy students. He turns and leaves, giving his official blessing for the hellish training to continue under the supervision of the little martial dictator. The disciples try to beg, stretching out their hands to the retreating instructor, but the door of salvation has now closed forever. They are officially condemned. The master is impressed by their supposed determination, unaware that it is pure terror. Ungum then shouts that they can continue encouraging them to achieve great results as he walks away, feeling his duty fulfilled. But the moment the instructor disappears from sight, the atmosphere in the courtyard instantly shifts to something far more sinister and heavy. Chung Myung calmly cracks his knuckles, the sound echoing like death sentences in the ears of the trembling disciples. He smiles amicably, saying he won't kill them, but just wants to have a much closer conversation in the central dormitory right now. Total panic seizes the group. Everyone knows that true hell is about to restart within the walls of the house. A muffled scream of despair rips through the mountain air as the disciples are dragged back to their daily routine. Later, in the stillness of his meditation, Chung Myung feels the chi flowing. His dantian is still small, but it is solidifying. Blue energy glows intensely around him, a sign that his Sword Saint soul is finally reconnecting. He observes the dormitory, knowing that putting that house in order was just the first necessary step for his larger plan. The sect elders whisper about him in secret, torn between worry over his erratic personality and hope for his immense talent. They admit that, despite everything, the boy has brought an energy Mount Hua hasn't seen in over an entire century. Chung Myung knows the path to the top isn't an unreachable dream, but a road paved with much blood and sweat. He rises, his eyes blazing with the promise to rebuild everything that was lost in that bloody war from his past. At mealtime, the refectory falls into a deathly silence. No one dares speak loudly in the presence of the new little monster. A disciple accidentally drops his chopsticks, the metallic clang sounding like thunder amidst the suffocating tension that dominates the air. He complains under his breath that the training is too heavy, that they can't even eat in peace without their muscles screaming in pain. Another apprentice begs Jogul to say something, to use his senior authority and stop this madness right now. But Jogul merely chews in silence, his face marked by exhaustion and a new strange understanding dawning within him. He looks at his peers with a hint of disdain and asks if they think he's just a messenger boy now. He tells them that if they're dissatisfied, they should have the courage to face the boy personally, which instantly silences everyone. Jogul stands and leaves, followed by the gazes of his subordinates, who feel betrayed and abandoned by their class leader. As he walks beneath the plum blossom trees, he finds the boy perched on a branch, observing the stars with a touch of melancholy. Jogul asks what he truly thinks of Mount Hua, a difficult question for someone who just arrived and caused so much upheaval. He confesses that he thought the sect was finished, that his destiny was to return to his town and forget his martial dream. But seeing Chung Myung exert himself more than anyone, without ever complaining, his heart definitively changed course. He feels an ardent desire to give his best, to become a master capable of leading the martial world once more. The boy on the branch merely smiles to himself, pleased to have hooked another important ally for his sacred cause. Chung Myung lies back on the tree branch, feeling that convincing Ungum and motivating Jogul were crucial victories for the day. He knows there's still a long way to go. The pieces on the board are just beginning to move in his direction. "Come quickly, sect leader," he murmurs, patiently awaiting the moment to confront the true authority of that decadent, sorrowful mountain. Suddenly, the sound of violent banging echoes from the sect's main gate, shattering the night's peace with a brutal crash. Gates are kicked with fury as men with torches invade the sanctuary, shouting for debts and demanding Hyun Jong's presence. Chaos erupts. Furious merchants break tradition and respect, treating martial artists like mere common street debtors. Chung Myung observes everything from atop the tree, his eyes narrowing as he watches Mount Hua Sect being so vilely humiliated. He realizes the place isn't just in physical ruins, but drowned in debts that could destroy what little remains. The merchants scream that they've waited too long, that the payment deadline has passed, and their patience has finally run out. He feels his blood boil. The audacity of debt collectors entering his sacred sect is an unforgivable insult. He asks if they are the merchants from Hua Prefecture, the village that grew at the foot of his ancestors' mountain. One of the disciples confirms, remembering having seen the pavilion owner when traveling with his merchant father in better times. Chung Myung clenches his fists tightly, a sacred fury beginning to overflow as he processes the gravity of the financial situation. He discovers the man in front is Kong, the owner of the region's largest pavilion and an extremely wealthy merchant. Taehua Pavilion? He repeats the name, hatred blazing in his pupils as he schemes how to deal with this new threat. The disciples desperately try to calm him, fearing he might do something impulsive that would worsen the undead sect's delicate situation even further. But Chung Myung wants no part of calm. For him, the honor of Mount Hua is worth more than any mountain of gold. He furiously wonders how the sect leader allowed things to reach this deplorable point of submission to mere merchants. Hyun Jong finally appears in the temple, his weary figure illuminated by the torches of the invaders who show no sign of respect. The boy observes the old leader, noting the sophisticated aura he tries to maintain even in the face of public humiliation and poverty. Kong, the fat merchant, laughs mockingly, acting as if he were the true owner of the place and the destiny of everyone there. He says it didn't want to ascend the mountain again, but the people's clamor for their payments forced him. He demands the sect fulfill the contract, reminding them that they've already been far too understanding of Mount Hua's miserable situation. He sets a final deadline of 7 days for the entire debt to be settled, or the sacred temple will be immediately confiscated. Shock courses through everyone present. Losing the temple means the definitive end of the Plum Blossom martial lineage. Chung Myung covers his mouth in shock, the horror of losing his physical home mixing with profound indignation. He cannot believe that the place where he lived for centuries is about to become the property of a filthy merchant. The night progresses, and the invaders withdraw triumphantly, leaving a trail of uncertainty and fear in the hearts of the few disciples. The boy returns to the dormitory in silence, the rhythmic sound of his fingers tapping on the table as he thinks obsessively. The veterans try to keep their distance, feeling that the energy emanating from him now is 1,000 times more dangerous than before. He confirms that Hua Prefecture is the source, the village that should be protected by the sect, not its executioner. He asks about Tai Hua Pavilion, wanting every detail about the business and weaknesses of that arrogant, greedy merchant. The disciples explain that Kong is the richest man, controlling almost all the lucrative businesses in that mountainous and prosperous region. Chung Myung smiles, a dark smile that would make the Demon King himself tremble with genuine and very profound fear. He already has a plan laid out, and it doesn't involve apologizing or begging for more time to pay off debts. The boy decides that if the merchants want a financial war, they will discover that Mount Hua still possesses very sharp teeth. He observes the broken gate with bitterness, a metaphor for his sect's current fragility under the management of these new elders. The courtyard is now empty and cold, but the echo of Kong's threats still lingers in the air like a poison. Chung Myung knows that the 7-day deadline is a death sentence that the enemy believes to be inevitable and certain. But he is the legendary Sword Saint, and he has never lost a single battle, be it against demons or greed. He plans his strategic descent down the mountain, preparing to deal with the world of common men with his usual ferocity. The merchants don't know it, but they have just signed their own end by attempting to extort the monster reborn from the ashes. The moonlight illuminates his youthful face, revealing the ancestral wisdom and killer instinct that guide his every step. He looks at the dried plum blossoms, promising that they will bloom again with the gold he will rip from them. The next day, the atmosphere in the sect is one of anticipated mourning, with the disciples already preparing to leave forever. They discuss where they will go when the temple closes, hope having been drained from their tired and sad bodies. Chung Myung watches them with profound contempt, irritated by the cowardice of those who should fight for their home until the end. He shouts that no one is going anywhere, his voice echoing with an authority that immediately silences the lamentations and crying. 7 days, he repeats the deadline, but with a tone that suggests this will be the time needed for his triumph. He demands that Jogul accompany him to the city, initiating the operation that will change Mount Hua's economic destiny. The senior disciple hesitates for a second, but Chung Myung's gaze is an absolute command that permits no questioning. They descend the mountain in absolute silence, the contrast between nature's peace and the turbulence of his mind being evident. Upon arriving at Hwaam Prefecture, the boy observes the merchant's opulence, the luxury built upon others' decay. He sees the Tai Hua Pavilion rising like a monument to arrogance, the center of all regional financial power. Chung Myung does not enter asking for an audience. He observes from the shadows, mapping every movement of his new, unsuspecting targets. He realizes that the merchants are overly confident, believing that Mount Hua's martial artists are just harmless old beggars. The boy decides that today's lesson will be about economics, but in the painful way only he knows how to teach it well. He instructs Jogul to attract the attention of one of Kong's subordinates, initiating the first phase of his intricate trap. Meanwhile, sect leader Hyun Jong prays in the sanctuary, asking forgiveness from his ancestors for having failed his mission. He does not know that the orphan he took in out of compassion is in fact the only salvation he ever dared to dream of. Chung Myung infiltrates the pavilion's archives, searching for debt records and the dirt every big merchant hides. He uncovers schemes of corruption and price manipulation that make his blood boil even more at Kong's hypocrisy. 7 days, he whispers with a macabre laugh. I only need 1 night to destroy this entire empire of lies. The Sword Saint's intelligence is as sharp as his blade. He connects the dots and finds the common thread. He finds the main debt document of Mount Hua, the paper that holds the fate of his beloved Sahyungs. The boy doesn't simply tear it. He wants something much bigger. He wants the total submission of those who dared to humiliate him. He returns to the shadows, finding Jogul waiting anxiously and confused by the strange orders he received. The senior disciple asks if they are going to steal the money, but Chung Myung just looks at him with a very sinister smile. He wants total control of the village, he wants the resources, and he wants everyone to eat meat again today. The night in the prefecture is bustling, but the real danger walks invisibly among the lights of the colorful lanterns. Chung Myung stops before a shop, buying a bottle with his last coins, celebrating in advance the chaos that is to come. He takes a sip and looks at the sky, feeling that the souls of his ancestors must be laughing with pleasure. The plan is in full motion, and from now on, no one in the province will be able to ignore the return of the flower. In the dormitory, the disciples cannot sleep, the tension of the debt being a much heavier burden than morning training. They wonder where the boy went, some hoping he had fled, others fearing his sudden and dangerous absence. Little do they know that their freedom is being forged in the shadows of a dark alley by a ruthless martial genius. Chung Myung returns to the mountain before dawn, his agile body scaling the cliffs with the ease of a predator. He enters the courtyard and sees sect leader Hyun Jong looking at the horizon, the weight of the world crushing him. The boy says nothing, merely passes by him with a gaze that carries a silent promise of victory and glory. The sun begins to rise again over Mount Hua, but this time, the light brings the scent of vengeance and redemption. Rage boils in his veins, each heartbeat a war drum crying for justice and blood. In a sudden movement, he grabs his Sahyung's collar with a strength that defies his frail and youthful appearance. He demands to know if that damned owner of the Tai Hua Pavilion truly believes he can confiscate Mount Hua's sacred temple. Shock is plastered on the disciples' faces as Chung Myung falters for a second, processing the audacity of those mediocre merchants. He lowers his head, hair covering his eyes, but the aura emanating from him is almost suffocating to everyone there. "Joe Gull," he whispers with a glacial voice, the kind of sound that could freeze hell itself. He then orders him to immediately bring that specific item he mentioned earlier, leaving the elder confused. Faced with the small monster's maniacal insistence, Joe Gull realizes there's no room for questions or hesitation. The shadows of the night begin to envelop the mountain as the infiltration plan comes to life in the former saint's mind. He watches the horizon, where the lights of the prefecture shine, with the arrogance of those who feel untouchable and safe. But the real danger walks invisibly, moving among the trees with the agility of a predator hungry for revenge. Chung Myung prepares his disguise, donning the black cloak that will transform him into a nightmare for the greedy below. Every adjustment to the garment is made with surgical precision. The weight of responsibility doesn't shake him, it only sharpens his focus. He knows martial might isn't enough to save the sect. He needs intelligence, records, and leverage. Meanwhile, the city streets bustle with the false sense of peace that precedes the devastating storm. Guards patrol the corners, relaxed and inattentive, unaware that death walks just above their heads. The boy leaps between rooftops with the silence of a falling petal but with the lethality of a sharp blade. His eyes search for the main target, the pavilion where merchants celebrate others' misery with laughter and wine. The imposing architecture of the place reflects the wealth stolen from Mount Hua over decades of cowardly exploitation. Chung Myung smells the rich food wafting from the windows, which only intensifies his contempt for those pigs. He positions himself strategically, observing every entrance and exit, calculating the perfect route for the coming chaos. The night is just beginning, and the fate of Xianxia province is about to be rewritten by a boy. He draws his short sword, feeling the cold steel against his palm, a perfect extension of his will. The silence of the prefecture is broken only by the distant sound of music and celebration, but that will soon drastically change. He penetrates the security perimeter without triggering a single alarm, moving like a ghost among the distracted sentinels. His mind travels for an instant to the glorious past, comparing the current decadence with the splendor he will rebuild. The objective is near. He feels the presence of the documents that hold the financial chains of his beloved disciples. Each step brings him closer to the truth hidden beneath layers of lies and corruption from the village's great merchants. He stops before an ornate door, listening to muffled voices discussing the final fate of his ancestral home. The mocking laughter of a merchant cuts through the air, sealing the fate of everyone inside that room. Chung Myung takes a deep breath, channeling his inner chi, preparing his body for the approaching explosion of violence. The lights of the colorful lanterns reflect in his eyes, now fixed on a single purpose, the total destruction of the enemy. He knows he cannot be identified as a member of Mount Hua, so his technique must be disguised. The Sword Saint's cunning is as sharp as his blade. He will place the blame on another powerful sect. The moment of truth arrives when he spots Kong's subordinate walking alone down a dark, damp alley. He descends from the shadows like a black blur, the speed of his attack leaving the man no time to react. The first strike is dry, hitting pressure points that paralyze the target before he even feels any pain. Chung Myung drags him into the darkness, where questions will be asked and silence will be the only forbidden answer. Inside a luxurious hall, the pavilion owner and his allies toast to their own boundless greed. Expensive wine is served in fine porcelain cups as they plan how to divide the spoils of the temple. They laugh openly, believing that the sect leader, Hyun Jong, is a weakling incapable of defending his legacy. A man dressed in green stumbles through the streets, feeling like the king of the world after the lavish feast. He brags to the shadows about how Mount Hua has finally fallen and how money will flow to them. But the roof of one of the buildings groans under the weight of an intruder who watches everything with absolute contempt. The green-clad merchant stops for an instant, feeling a strange shiver run up his spine, instinct signaling danger. He looks around but sees only cold walls and lanterns swaying gently in the night breeze. Suddenly, a hooded figure blocks his path, standing motionless like a black marble statue under the moon. The man in green tries to maintain his composure, arrogantly asking who dares cross a merchant's path. The masked figure doesn't respond with words, only tilts his head slightly, emanating a murderous intent that chills the air. You talk too much about what doesn't belong to you. Chung Myung's voice emerges distorted and menacing from behind the cloth. The merchant steps back, his confidence vanishing as he realizes he's not facing a common thief. He tries to scream for his guards, but the words die in his throat before the boy's piercing gaze. It's no use screaming, the masked figure warns. Your guard dogs have already been properly silenced by the darkness of the night. Chung Myung advances slowly, each step echoing like a death sentence against the cobblestones of the street. The man in green finally panics, realizing that his wealth cannot protect him from such martial fury. He pleads for his life, offering gold and jewels in exchange for freedom, but the boy merely laughs dryly. A group of guards suddenly appears, drawing their swords and surrounding the hooded figure with loud shouts of command. Chung Myung closes his eyes for a brief moment, sensing the position of each opponent purely through the vibration of the air. The guard leader demands his surrender, but the boy merely unsheathes his blade with a metallic clang. In the blink of an eye, the courtyard transforms into a battlefield where only one side holds control. He explodes like an arrow, his sword describing arcs of light that effortlessly cut through the steel of enemy weapons. The merchant in green watches, paralyzed with terror, as his best men drop like sacks of potatoes to the ground. Chung Myung's movements are a macabre dance of efficiency and grace, each strike hitting a precise, vital point. He kicks a guard against the wall with monstrous force, the sound of breaking bones echoing throughout the alley. The boy stops over the fallen bodies, his breathing not even altered by the effort of defeating so many warriors at once. He stares at the remaining merchant, who is now fallen to his knees, sobbing and begging for mercy at his feet. Chung Myung steps on the man's chest, forcing him to look up as the tip of his sword touches his neck. Now you will tell me everything about the debt records and the rotten secrets of your Master Kong, he orders. In the dormitory, the tension among the disciples is palpable. They fear the consequences of their new instructor's impulsive actions. Jo-gul watches Chung Myung's hand, which still grips the fabric of his clothes with unshakable firmness. The boy loosens his grip, but the gaze he casts upon his Saiyungs is laden with ancient wisdom. He explains that today's lesson will be about how the world truly operates behind the curtains of honor. Jo-gul swallows hard, realizing that the boy they took in is far more than a talented orphan. Chung Myung walks through the room, his presence dominating the space in a way that defies his current physical age. He points to the men fallen mentally in his memory, describing how weakness attracts the vultures of corrupt society. If you are not strong enough to protect what is yours, the merchants will take even your souls. The elder asks what they should do now, and the boy replies with a smile that borders on madness. He wants them to see the reality of the sect, bankrupt, humiliated, and surrounded by enemies who pretend to be friends. Chung Myung details the plan to destabilize Kong's empire using the merchant's own rules against him. He demands total dedication, warning that anyone who falters will be left behind in the reconstruction of Mount Hua. The boy speaks about the importance of regaining dignity before regaining martial strength through hard training. He gesticulates with his hands, illustrating how money and the sword must walk hand in hand to ensure their survival. Jo-gul feels a spark of motivation ignite in his chest, something he hadn't felt in many years there. He realizes that, under the leadership of this strange boy, Mount Hua might now have a real chance at rebirth. Chung Myung concludes the conversation with a direct order, preparing for the next phase of his nocturnal operation in the city. The streets of Hua Prefecture remain bustling, unaware that their greatest nightmare walks freely among them. The boy and Jo-gul move through the shadows, avoiding the main patrols as they approach the pavilion's central office. Chung Myung's intelligence shines as he identifies the weak points in the security of the city's most protected building. He treads softly on the ground, feeling the vibrations of the people still working within the imposing wooden structure. Suddenly, an elite warrior appears out of nowhere, blocking their path with a long sword gleaming under the moonlight. It is Yungbin, the famous escort warrior, who looks at the duo with a mix of boredom and arrogance. Chung Myung is not intimidated. He merely adjusts his combat stance, recognizing that this opponent possesses some level of skill. The escort warrior mocks the boy, thinking that defeating a few common guards makes him a martial arts master. Yungbin charges with a powerful frontal attack, the force of his blow creating a shockwave that kicks up dust. But Chung Myung deflects with annoying ease, moving as if he could predict every millimeter of the enemy blade's trajectory. The escort's gaze shifts from boredom to surprise when he realizes his fastest attack couldn't even scratch the intruder. The boy counterattacks with a palm strike to Youngbin's chest, sending the experienced warrior flying backward. The escort's sword clatters to the ground while he struggles to regain his breath after the monstrous impact. Chung Myung, still masked, walks calmly toward the fallen man, his aura of power growing with each step he takes. Youngbin tries to get up, but the pain in his ribs forces him to remain on his knees before the young master. Cold sweat drips down the escort warrior's face as he now understands the chasm of power that exists between them. "Who are you?" he asks with a trembling voice, but the boy merely replies that his identity doesn't matter now. Chung Myung demands immediate access to the vaults and accounting records that Kong keeps hidden from everyone in the prefecture. He grabs Youngbin by the neck, lifting the adult man off the ground with a single hand, demonstrating absolute superhuman strength. The boy tightens his grip, forcing the warrior to surrender the keys and the exact location of the documents he seeks. With the information in hand, Chung Myung releases the man, who collapses like a sack of potatoes, coughing and gasping. The boy enters the office, his eyes scanning the shelves packed with books until he finds what he truly wishes to see. He swiftly flips through the pages, his mind processing the numbers and uncovering the massive frauds committed against Mount Hua. A satisfied smile forms beneath his mask. He has found proof that the debts were artificially inflated by the merchants. But he finds something even more crucial, records indicating that the city's main businesses originally belonged legally to the sect. He realizes that Kong and his predecessors stole Mount Hua's assets during the years of weakness and war. Chung Myung exits the office and finds the fat merchant attempting to flee through the back in a luxurious and swift carriage. The man is in utter panic, his jowls trembling as he orders the coachman to drive as fast as possible. The boy appears before the carriage, stopping the horses with a single gaze that exudes ancestral and divine authority. He drags the merchant out, throwing him onto the dirty ground as the man begs for his pathetic, miserable life. The boy stares at him with an icy gaze, the kind that could break the mind of an ordinary man. He reveals that he knows about the theft of businesses and the debt forgeries, leaving the merchant pale as a ghost. "You are an utter scoundrel," Chung Myung whispers, before delivering a slap that sends the man tumbling across the ground. He decides not to kill him yet. The merchant will be more useful as a tool in his plan for a complete takeover. The boy retreats into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a clear message for those who can read it. Back at the temple, he finds Joe Ghoul and the other disciples waiting anxiously, fear still etched on their faces. They ask if he got the money, but Chung Myung merely shakes his head, a thoughtful and profound look in his eyes. He explains that money is only part of the problem. The true treasure lies in the stolen property rights. The boy sits on the ground, closing his eyes and trying to access memories from 100 years ago that are beginning to clear. He remembers seeing his Sahyung Jangmun acting suspiciously with some important accounting ledgers. The image of Jangmun hiding secret volumes resurfaces in his mind with surprising clarity and full of hope. Chung Myung realizes that the official records might have been burned, but Jangmun was always a cautious and wise man. He opens his eyes with a flash of epiphany, realizing that the answer to all his financial woes lies within the temple itself. He discusses the sect's past with the other disciples, trying to extract any detail that might lead to the secret hiding place. The boy realizes that the temple's structure has barely changed since he died atop that mountain. He begins to investigate the walls and floor of the sect leader's residence, searching for hidden compartments or seals. Meanwhile, the fat merchant in the city desperately tries to reassert his authority, but the boy's fear hounds him. Chung Myung continues his frantic search, every second vital to prevent the imminent confiscation planned by the merchants. He remembers an old conversation about the heart of Mount Hua, which didn't refer solely to martial techniques. The boy explains to the confused disciples that Jangmun hid the most valuable things where no one would normally dare to look. He looks at the hills behind the residence, sensing that the soil there holds secrets buried for future protection. The team gathers, torn between doubts about the boy and the desperate need to believe his strange words. One of the older disciples comments on legends of a hidden treasure, but Chung Myung says it's not gold. "What we seek is proof of who truly rules this land," he states with absolute, cutting conviction. He instructs everyone to begin a careful excavation under his direct supervision, keeping the secret away from the elders' eyes. The boy monitors their progress, his patience tested as the time for debt repayment rapidly runs out. Suddenly, one of the disciples strikes something solid at the bottom of a cavity hidden beneath the roots of an ancient tree. Tension peaks as they remove the earth, revealing a heavy metal box sealed with ancient markings. Chung Myung opens the box with trembling hands, one of the rare moments he displays true human emotion. Inside, perfectly preserved, are the original accounting ledgers from 100 years ago, detailing every possession of the sect. A macabre Victorious escapes his lips. Now he holds Kong and all the merchants by their necks. He shows the documents to Joe Ghoul, explaining that with these, they will not only forgive the debt, but reclaim the city. The flames that consumed Mount Hua in the past failed to erase Jangmun's foresight and the Saint's destiny. The boy feels a deep connection with his deceased Sa-young, silently thanking him for the legacy left for this very moment. But he knows that possessing the papers is only the beginning. He will need strength to enforce these rights against the greedy. He returns to the central courtyard, where the other disciples await him for the start of a brutal new training regimen. He announces that from today, no one will have a moment of rest until Mount Hua returns to its rightful place. Chung Myung takes on the role of instructor with a severity that shocks even the most dedicated, his mental whip cracking. He observes their every movement, correcting technical flaws with the precision of someone who has mastered the sword for centuries. The sun begins to set, tinging the plum blossoms a deep red that recalls the blood of ancestors. The boy whispers to himself that revenge against time and oblivion is only just beginning to take shape. He gazes at the hills one last time, feeling that Mount Hua's soul is finally awakening from its long slumber. In the village, Merchant Kong looks at the night sky with a terrible premonition that his fortune is about to crumble. The darkness seems to whisper the name of the sect he tried to destroy, now returning with renewed and unstoppable fury. Chung Myung decides that tomorrow will be the day to officially confront the merchants, with proof and blade in hand. He smiles confidently because he knows he is about to subvert the expectations of the entire martial world. But what no one saw coming is that the boy doesn't just want the money, he wants total submission. His intuition strikes like lightning. The secret vault must be hidden in the hills right behind the residence, an obvious yet perfectly protected location. If they built the storage under the hills, there's no way anyone would discover it on their own. He reasons with a glint of malice in his eyes. A smirk forms on his young face, the expression of someone about to pull off a historic heist against the past itself. "Looks like I'm going on an unprecedented treasure hunt," he whispers into the darkness, already feeling the weight of the riches that await him. The boy then offers a silent, sarcastic prayer. "Please forgive me for raiding the vault, Sa-young Jang Mun, but the sect needs me." After all, saving Mount Hua is his absolute priority, even if it means desecrating the best-kept secrets of his ancient comrades in arms. He leaps through the window with the agility of a feline, crossing rooftops like a stealthy shadow as the world around him plunges into deep sleep. With a pickaxe slung over his shoulder and iron determination, he moves toward his objective, promising to deliver everything to the leader if possible. If possible, of course, he adds with a mocking tone, knowing his definition of necessary is far broader than that of the elders. He treads firmly on the hillside soil and feels the mountain's energy beneath his feet, each step a search for any irregularity in the terrain. Chung Myung begins to concentrate his chi, sending pulses of energy deep into the earth, trying to map what ordinary eyes would never see. The pressure builds, and he strains, veins bulging on his forehead as he plunges his martial consciousness into the heart of stone and mud. Suddenly, he collapses to the ground, panting and exhausted. Though it seems like a small hill, scouring an entire mountain is a brutal task for his current body. Fatigue hits him like a monstrous punch to the gut, but he refuses to give up, wiping away the sweat that threatens to blind his determined vision. Even using his advanced detection methods, the secret remains elusive, mocking his impatience as time for debt payment slips away. He takes a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill his lungs, and decides he won't leave empty-handed, no matter the cost. "Damn it, one more time," he yells internally, concentrating every last drop of his remaining chi into a final, desperate localization effort. He focuses energy in his palms and projects it into the ground, creating an invisible shockwave that travels through the subterranean layers. If this energy finds a large empty space, that will be the vault. He stakes everything on this theory, his mind calculating every chi reflection. The energy pulse descends like a spear of blue light, piercing the darkness of the subsoil in search of any hidden artificial cavity. Suddenly, a strange echo returns to his martial consciousness, a vibration indicating something different from the solid rock that makes up the rest of the hill. I don't know where it is exactly, but there's no other reason for an empty space to be here, he thinks, his heart pounding against his ribs. Exhaustion momentarily overcomes him, and he collapses onto his back, gazing at the starry sky as he tries to catch his breath, which seems to have vanished. It's probably not here. Damn it, I'm going to die like this, he grumbles, tongue hanging out as his body begs for immediate rest. But the sparkle in his eyes doesn't fade. The instinct of a sword saint never fails, and he knows he's on the right track. He springs up with a sudden leap, ignoring the muscle pain, and decides that one last attempt is all he needs now. Once again, he plunges his power into the ground, the blue energy illuminating the earth as if he were trying to summon an ancient god. And then the impossible happens. A dull, hollow sound reverberates in his hands, confirming that the void beneath him is real and vast. "I found it!" he exclaims with a victorious laugh that echoes softly among the trees, the satisfaction of a predator who has finally located its prey. Now he needs to dig, and each strike of his tool into the earth is driven by the urgency of someone with the sect's neck on the line. He wants to confirm with his own eyes, tearing through the soil with a controlled fury that would make any professional miner look like a slow amateur. The pickaxe hits something solid with a dry crack, and Chung Myung pauses for a second, feeling the cold of metal against the buried stone. He frantically brushes away the dirt and finds bricks, common bricks in a place that should house Mount Hua's greatest treasures. If this is truly the secret vault, there's no way it's just made of bricks. There should be books and treasures here, he questions. He fumbles along the makeshift wall with trembling hands, searching for a hidden entrance or a mechanism that reveals the true magnitude of the hideout. With a precise movement, he removes one of the bricks, and his face lights up as he realizes there was a hidden corridor behind that facade. He peeks through the crack, his eyes wide as he sees a long dark path descending into the mountain's depths, far from any map. A corridor! "I found the corridor that leads to the secret vault." Joy explodes in his chest, but he quickly silences himself to avoid attracting attention. He descends silently, his light steps barely touching the stone floor as the atmosphere around him becomes charged with an ancient energy. But the sound of heavy rhythmic footsteps makes him freeze in place. Someone is down there, walking with the slowness of one who carries the weight of the world. He peeks through a hole in the wall, and shock hits him like lightning. It's Hyun-jong, the current sect leader, walking alone. The sect leader? So he knows about the hidden vault. Chung Myung observes cautiously, trying to understand what the elder is doing there. Hyun-jong walks with slumped shoulders, his presence emanating a deep sadness that seems to fill the entire cold space of that underground corridor. The elder stops before a monumental door, covered in scratches and marks from frustrated attempts to open it over many decades of decline. Could that scratched door be the entrance to the vault? The boy wonders, watching the leader trace the metal with a trembling hand. Hyun-jong merely presses his face against the cold door and lets out a sigh that seems to carry centuries of disappointment and powerlessness before fate. Seeing his leader so broken, Chung Myung feels a pang of remorse. He realizes the man isn't trying to open the door. He's just standing there, the image of someone who can do absolutely nothing to save what he loves most in the martial world. Hyun-jong watches the sect crumble, martial arts decline, and wealth vanish, and being the leader in this scenario is a purely depressing task. What must it feel like to watch the place you've protected your entire life fall apart without being able to lift a finger to stop it? The leader cannot tell anyone about this despair, so he retreats into the darkness to endure his pain and sorrow in complete solitude. He weeps in silence, tears wet in his robe as he bids farewell to a glory he never truly had the chance to live. The sun begins to rise, and Hyun-jong withdraws, leaving behind only the echo of his sorrow and the door that remains sealed. Chung Myung emerges from the shadows as soon as the leader leaves, his gaze now fixed on the monumental entrance that barred his successor's way. "It's my fault," he whispers to himself, feeling the weight of having left the sect in that state after his past death. "But it's not too late," he declares, with cutting conviction, his eyes shining with a renewed determination that could set the entire mountain ablaze. He walks to the dark metal door. The object's menacing aura doesn't intimidate him. He knows exactly what he's facing now. He touches the surface and feels the vibration of power. The mechanism is complex, designed to be opened only by those who know the true essence. Chung Myung decides he will blast open that damn door whatever the cost and return to Mount Hua what was stolen by time. He positions his palm against the central seal, sending a pulse of chi to test the resistance of the metal, protecting the treasure. The energy strikes the door and ricochets with a violence that shocks the boy, throwing him back with a dry, painful impact. The energy ricocheted? No way. This is, he murmurs, surprise etched on his face as he stares at the insurmountable obstacle. Eternal steel? He exclaims internally, recognizing the strongest metal in the world, whose value is said to be greater than pure gold itself. The door is at least 30 centimeters thick. It would take the most powerful master in the entire world to merely scratch that structure. Now he understands why Hyun Jong didn't even try to open it. For ordinary hands, it's just an eternal wall of cold, mute metal. The problem is, even I can't open this in my current state, he admits, feeling the weight of his young new body's limitations. He remembers Jangmun and realizes that if his Sayoung passed through here, there must be a legitimate way to open the seal. If only I could find that path, he murmurs, as his fingers begin to trace the intricate patterns carved into the door's metallic surface. Suddenly, his eyes widen. The pattern on the wall isn't decorative. They are deep blade marks, made by a master hand. He recognizes the strokes. They are fragments of the 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique, the definitive signature of his sect. This is the bamboo leaf sword technique. This is the plum blossom. And this is the balance technique he identifies. Now that he knows they are sword marks, everything begins to make sense. The door is a test of mastery and spiritual lineage. If these marks are the clues to open the door, he needs to execute the techniques perfectly in the air for the seal to respond. So it's the fortified violet dawn chi that must be used, he deduces, feeling the connection between the energy and the mechanism. He must follow the marks precisely, starting with balance and ending with the dance of the plum blossoms to finally unlock the forbidden path. This is how this door is opened, a security system that demands the knowledge only true heirs of Mount Hua possess. But how will he perform all these techniques simultaneously? His current body is weak, and his chi reserve is lamentably small for such a feat. Executing all of this instantly is currently impossible, but Chung Myung smiles because he knows there is always a way for a genius. He scratches his head, hesitant. He really didn't want to resort to this, as the physical consequences will be devastating for his growth. Let's just say I'll need a month's rest after this, he sighs, preparing for a necessary and painful sacrifice. He places his hand over his dantian and begins to force the compression of chi, a dangerous technique that can shatter his meridians if it fails. He will use just a bit of his vital essence, just enough to temporarily overload his energy channels and simulate the ancient power. Purple, electric energy begins to emanate from his pores, the air around him trembling with the pressure of a technique that should not be used. If you use this, you must prepare for the consequences. But the boy knows he has no choice if he wants to save his family now. He braces himself on the ground, the violet dawn chi aura exploding around him in a whirlwind of light and pure energy petals. He draws his sword and feels the weight of responsibility. He only has one chance, a single shot to hit the perfect sequence. Blood begins to trickle from his lips as he forces the chi to flow, but he bites his tongue and focuses all his will. Is it possible? It has to be possible, he mentally shouts, defying the laws of nature and the limitations of his own mortal flesh now. His body is acting strangely because it's not accustomed to such potency, each heartbeat a deafening war drum. There will be no second chances. At the first movement, either he opens the vault or his body will be reduced to ashes by the internal pressure. He erupts like a blur of light, his sword slicing through the air in a frenetic sequence that draws luminous petals in the dark corridor. The air groans under the technique's impact, and he feels the sword's weight double with each passing second, his muscles screaming in extreme agony. Yet, he cannot stop. From balance to bamboo leaf, he flows with the grace of a 100-year master. From bamboo leaf to the 24 movements, he stacks technique upon technique, creating a symphony of steel and violet light. Not a single pause is allowed. The rhythm must be absolute for the eternal steel seal to recognize the soul of the Sword Saint. The final effort is an explosion of energy that illuminates the entire underground, the plum blossom petals swirling in a devastating vortex of power. He collapses to the ground, coughing blood and feeling every nerve in his body ablaze, as silence returns to the stone corridor. Blood stains the cold floor, a reminder of the price paid for his audacity in defying the line between human and divine. Did it work? He whispers with difficulty, wiping the corner of his mouth as he tries to focus his gaze on the monumental door before him. It would be devastating if it still didn't open after all this infernal sacrifice and the pain tearing through his insides. A metallic sound of moving gears begins to echo, a heavy creak indicating that the 100-year seal has finally been broken. The door shakes violently, dust falling from the ceiling, as Jang Moon's secret mechanism recognizes the absolute mastery of his old brother. Chung Myung watches, paralyzed by pain but with a heart overflowing with triumph, as the colossal entrance slowly begins to open. Light from within the vault leaks through the cracks, a promise of hope shining against the darkness of the past that tormented them. It opened! He celebrates with a hoarse voice, a macabre and victorious laugh escaping his lips. Even as he struggles to remain conscious, he stumbles forward, hand clutching his stomach as dizziness threatens him, but the sight of the vault's interior keeps him on his feet. Blood continues to flow, painting the sect's sacred metal with the sweat and life of its greatest defender, the Plum Blossom Saint. Looks like I'll be bedridden for at least 2 months, not 1, he grumbles with a stubborn smile, already planning how to explain this. Saving Mount Hua is a pain in the ass, but he wouldn't trade this burden for anything in the martial world. As he breathes the air from within, he enters the vault, his eyes gleaming at the sight of shelves filled with scrolls and books that carry the lost knowledge of his lineage. He unsheathes a short sword for support, his eyes scanning every detail of what his Sang Jang Moon had hidden from the world. Let's see what you've been hiding from me, you stubborn old man, he mutters, as the door fully opens, revealing a vast hall. The boy steps into the secret hall, and the air feels lighter, laden with the scent of ancient paper and the gleam of forgotten riches. He walks among the shelves, his trembling fingers touching the spines of the books that tell the history and secret techniques of his family. The magnitude of what he found begins to settle in his mind. It's not just 3 shelves, it's the living heart of the sect. It's smaller than I thought, but it makes sense, he reflects, knowing that building something like this in eternal steel would be a Herculean feat. He realizes that Jang Moon spent all the fortune of that era to create this impenetrable sanctuary, protecting the future against any imminent catastrophe. He picks up the first book from the shelf, and his eyes widen in pure shock. He has finally found what he so desperately sought to fight. They are Mount Hua's original accounting ledgers. Every transaction, every possession, and every debt of the corrupt merchants is recorded there in detail. He leafs through the pages with feverish speed, a laugh of satisfaction growing in his throat as he sees proof of Kong's betrayal. "Damn merchants, you're all screwed now," he exclaims, knowing that with those documents he holds all their necks in his hand. He stuffs the books into his robes, feeling the weight of victory against his chest. Now he can reclaim the shops and their dignity. But, stopping to think, are there really only papers in this place? The boy looks around with a gleam of renewed greed. If Sa Young hid money here, he could use it for the greater good, which in his mind includes quality meat and alcohol. That disgusting old man. Did he really not hide any coins here? He grumbles, stomping his foot on the stone floor with comical frustration. He sighs, resigned to only look at the papers, but his hand touches a scroll on the second shelf that looks different from the other records. He opens it with curiosity and his face freezes. It's a book of secret techniques that were never used or taught to the current disciples. Wait a second. These are martial arts that were practically abandoned by Mount Hua, he mutters, feeling the weight of lost knowledge between his fingers. Jang Moon must have stored them here, thinking that discarding them would negatively impact the sect in the future, keeping the flame alive in the darkness. The old man truly couldn't let go of the past, and, luckily for him, the Sword Saint is here to bring these techniques to life. If the first shelf represents the leader's duties, the second must signify Jang Moon's personal longings and affections for the sect. Don't worry, Sehyung. I will ensure Mount Hua returns to its rightful place at the top of the 10 great sects, he promises. Chung Myung looks at the third shelf and notices a single solitary scroll, resting as if it had been waiting for him all these years. He carefully unfurls the document and realizes it's a letter written by the former leader's own hand to his distant successor. If someone is reading this, it means the next leader of the sect has been decided. The letter begins, its words carrying timeless wisdom. Chung Myung explains that a leader's role is not just to command, but to provide protection and motivation for everyone to achieve their dreams. The letter asks to abandon impatience and understand that Mount Hua is full of spirit, something no one can truly control or lead. Whether in ascent or decline, the sect will always be itself, and this truth echoes deeply in the young warrior's weary soul now. Chung Myung finishes reading in reverent silence, feeling an indescribable connection with the man he once called a brother in arms. All right then. I didn't get much, but this should be enough for now, he says, preparing to seal the vault once more. What matters is that he secured the ledger books, the ultimate weapon to destroy Kong's empire and reclaim the local prefecture. But he halts abruptly at the exit, his master instinct screaming that something in this hall still feels very strange and out of place. The Sa-young Chung Myung he knew had terrible OCD and an unhealthy obsession with symmetry in absolutely everything he did. Would someone like him leave only the third shelf almost empty? That makes no sense to anyone who truly knows the man behind the title. This is, he murmurs, approaching the suspicious bookshelf with a sharp gaze that could cut through the very air thick with mystery. He grabs the side of the solid wooden shelf and pulls with all his might, the metal groaning under the pressure of his discovery. I was right, he yells, as the shelf slides away, revealing a secret compartment hidden beneath the false floor of that subterranean hall. A blinding golden light explodes from the hole, illuminating the boy's face with the gleam of a treasure he never imagined finding. Below, colossal stacks of pure gold bars are piled in perfect order, shining like the sun itself in the depths of the Forbidden Mountain. There are precious swords arranged with surgical precision, each one worth a fortune and carrying the power of generations of master swordsmen. Unknown jewels and rare gems sparkle like fallen stars, surrounded by even more books of secret techniques that have never seen the light of day. Chung Myung plunges into the riches, holding a cat's eye stone, his eyes bulging with greed and pure joy on his dirt-streaked face. His maniacal laughter echoes through the walls of Eternal Steel, the sound of absolute victory from one who has just changed destiny. Now I'm rich. Filthy rich, he screams into the void, his mind already calculating the army he can build with this fortune. The spirit of Jang Moon seems to observe from the shadows, shaking his head at the limitless greed of his stubborn younger brother. Morning arrives, and the sun illuminates Mount Hua, as Yoon-jong watches from his window with the same worried, sad gaze as always. Suddenly, Gum appears, running desperately, his face pale and gasping, indicating that something extraordinary has happened on the sect's training grounds. Sect leader, you need to come see this right now, he shouts, interrupting the elder's meditation with an almost terrifying urgency. Yoon-jong follows his subordinate, leaping between the mountains with agility, his heart pounding with the premonition that chaos has finally erupted. Upon arriving at the scene, he finds dozens of disciples fallen to the ground, knocked out and exhausted after a training session that defied all human logic. Gum, what happened to these boys? The leader asks, horrified, watching the youths gasp as if they had faced an army of demons. The real shock comes when he looks to the side. Chung Myung is sitting calmly under a tree, reading his news books as if nothing had happened. The true monster finally awakens to reclaim his throne. His gaze is profound, laden with the wisdom of a past life and the malice of one who already knows what comes next. But the approach of familiar figures makes him avert his attention. Seeing the sect leader and his companions appear with urgency, Yoon-jong observes the young man with a mix of concern and fatigue, unaware that the sect's reality is about to suffer a seismic shock. The boy barely moves, maintaining his relaxed posture before the highest authority, with a gleam of secrecy in his dark eyes that defies all logic. Yoon-jong asks what he is doing there, isolated, but Chung Myung merely smiles, that smile that usually precedes absolute chaos and the changing of eras. The elder sighs, the weight of years and debts bowing his shoulders, but he stops abruptly upon noticing something strange in the environment. Chung Myung points to the ground, to what appears to be just earth and roots, but a different energy pulses in that sacred spot now. Yoon-jong approaches, his martial master senses beginning to tingle with the imminent discovery that will change his life definitively and brutally. The boy stands, dusting off his clothes, and makes a theatrical gesture for the elder to see what he casually found there. Take a look at this, sect leader, he says with a mocking tone that hides the magnitude of the treasure resting beneath them. Hyunjong hesitates for a second, his heart pounding against his ribs, feeling that Mount Hua's ruin might be coming to an end. He looks into the void at the shadows cast by the tree, and then the light begins to reflect off something metallic and ancient. Shock courses through his spine like lightning, paralyzing his muscles as he tries to process the golden glow emanating from the open hole. Behind him, the other disciples remain in absolute silence, their breath caught in their throats before the sight of the impossible unfolding before their eyes. Hyunjong falls to his knees, his hands trembling violently as he approaches what time and betrayal had tried to hide for eternity. He can't believe that destiny has been so generous after decades of suffering and constant humiliation at the hands of merchants without any honor. His fingers touch the cold metal and aged paper, feeling the sect's history vibrate in every fiber of his weary being. Now, tears begin to well up, but they are tears of a hope he thought had long died in the mountains. He grasps one of the volumes, protecting it as if it were the most precious thing in the entire universe, and his face transforms in disbelief. The elder looks at Chung Myung, trying to understand how that little demon managed to accomplish what generations of masters had failed to find in the darkness. He raises the book to the light, and the title glows with an authority that makes the very air around it vibrate with power. The others approach, drawn by the dazzling glow and the aura of victory that begins to envelop the sect's training grounds. Hyunjong whispers words of gratitude to the ancestors, feeling that Mount Hua's protection never abandoned its most loyal and determined children. He opens the first page with almost religious care, fearing the knowledge might crumble to dust before being properly absorbed. The sun illuminates the scene, creating a divine aura around the elder who holds the future of his school in his trembling hands. Chung Myung merely observes with crossed arms, satisfied with the impact of his accidental discovery, which was anything but accidental. However, the emotion is too much for Hyunjong's old heart, which begins to falter under the pressure of so much accumulated wealth. Yun Young, the financial leader, appears soon after, his nose for gold guiding him directly to the epicenter of that fortune. Unexpected. Upon seeing the contents of the chest, he lets out a scream that echoes through the valleys, his eyes gleaming with the purest, wildest greed. Wild greed. It's all real, he roars, plunging his hands into the gold bars as if in a dream he never wants to wake up from. Hyunjong tries to maintain his dignity, but the weight of responsibility and joy makes him waver, the world spinning around him. He sees the government documents, the legal proofs that will return everything stolen from Mount Hua by the merchant wolves. Merchants. Chung Myung watches it all with a smirk, knowing the fun has only just begun, and that heads will roll. The elder touches one of the technique manuals, feeling the energy of the plum blossom pulsate within the pages, an ancient power that awakens. He gazes at the horizon, where the sun begins to set, painting the sky with the colors of the sect he swore to protect. This is the 7 Plum Blossom Sword technique, he exclaims, his voice faltering at the discovery of the most sacred manual. The shock is absolute. Hyunjong's mind simply cannot bear the weight of so much glory recovered all at once. At the same time, far away, on the steep mountain slopes, a group of corpulent, richly dressed men struggle to climb the winding path. Tortuous path. Sweat drips down their avaricious faces as they complain about the distance and the effort required to reach the Mount Hua Temple. Hua. Pavilion owner Kong leads the group with an expression of disdain, firmly believing that the sect leader will beg. They chat amongst themselves, laughing at the sect's supposed misery and planning how they will divide the remnants of that once so powerful school. One of them stumbles in the stones, cursing the damned mountain, wishing he never had to set foot in that place of poverty again. Their arrogance is almost palpable, an aura of superiority based solely on the gold they believe the sect no longer possesses. Kong smiles maliciously, imagining the satisfaction of seeing the proud Hyunjong bow before his wealth and his demands. They arrive at the main gate, panting and irritated, but maintaining the posture of those who wield absolute power over others' destinies. Why did he call us so early? One of the merchants asks, wiping his neck with an expensive, faded silk scarf. Another replies, with obvious scorn, suggesting that the sect has finally gone bankrupt, and that they are there to collect the spoils. They walk through the courtyard, looking at the ancient buildings with contempt, seeing only ruins where history and a legacy of blood exists. Their presence stains the purity of the place, but the merchants are too busy calculating interest and properties to notice the heavy atmosphere. They gather before the main hall, expecting to be received with the subservience they believe they deserve from a desperate bankrupt debtor. Kong adjusts his red robes, wanting to appear as imposing as possible for the final confrontation he believes he will control. Meanwhile, shop owner Yu lingers a bit further back with a melancholic gaze, feeling the weight of Mount Hua's history in his heart. He is the only one who seems to have a trace of respect, but his voice is drowned out by the raucous laughter of the other greedy merchants. Suddenly, the hall door opens and a disciple emerges, inviting them in with a courtesy that leaves them intrigued. They climb the stairs with heavy steps, the sound of their boots echoing like an insult in the silent corridors of the ancient sect. Now, inside, the dim light conceals expressions, but Hyun-jong's figure already awaits them, seated with a calm that unnerves them. The sect leader greets them with a solemn nod, while the merchants bow hastily and visibly falsely in the room. Kong steps forward, his voice laden with a false concern that deceives no one in that hall heavy with tension and mystery. He states that everyone promptly answered the call, but his gaze sweeps the room in search of any obvious sign of weakness. Hyun-jong thanks them for their presence, maintaining a mask of serenity that begins to make the merchants increasingly uncomfortable and alert. The elder mentions that the journey was long and tiring, offering tea as if nothing out of the ordinary was about to happen that day. But Kong, impatient and thirsty for results, cuts through the formalities with a brutality that shocks even his fellow greedy companions. He demands to get straight to the point, wanting to know if the sect has finally prepared the money it owes to everyone present there. Hyun-jong closes his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the man's insolence before delivering the fatal blow. He admits that he contacted many people, but that no one was willing to lend money to a sect in ruins. The merchants exchange victorious glances, believing that the confirmation of their bankruptcy is the prelude to the surrender of the sacred lands. Kong now smiles openly, his fat face twisting into an expression of absolute triumph over the elder he despises. Hyun-jong continues, saying that, because of this, he will not be able to pay the full debt within the deadline stipulated by them. The silence that follows is thick, broken only by the panting breaths of the merchants who are already savoring their impending victory in this. Then, the sect leader makes an unexpected request, asking if anyone there would be willing to show mercy and postpones the deadline. The question hangs in the air like a bad joke for the merchants who have never known another language than that of profit. Kong laughs dryly, saying that the sect's time is up and that business does not allow for sentiments or any kind of charity. Hyun-jong lowers his head in a gesture that appears to be one of total defeat, but is actually the gathering of the predator. He pleads in the name of the ancestors, asking them to consider the history and what Mount Hua represents for the entire province of xianxia. The merchants begin to whisper, mocking the elder's plea, feeling like gods deciding the life of a mere mortal with no resources. Kong asserts that no one there will yield, as they all have their own profits to protect and cannot support a dead school. In the corner, shop owner Yu observes the scene with a pale face, the internal struggle visible in his tear-filled eyes brimming with emotion. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the courtyard, Chung Myung watches everything from atop a wall, a maniacal smile dancing on his lips. He knows exactly what the elder is doing and can't wait to see the faces of these pigs when the truth explodes. So, this is how he does things, the boy murmurs, finding the sect leader's performance worthy of a grand master. Hyun-jong slowly rises, his aura subtly shifting, the weight of defeat giving way to a cold, sharp determination like steel. He looks into the eyes of each merchant, engraving their faces of betrayal for the reckoning that will come in a few moments. The sun reaches its zenith, illuminating the ritual swords in the hall, symbols of an honor the merchants would never understand. Hyun-jong repeats his proposal. Whoever steps aside and accepts the deferment will be treated with due consideration by the sect. Kong scoffs again, stating that no one is foolish enough to accept such a deal with an institution on the verge of disappearing. He challenges the others to remain where they are, guaranteeing that the merchant's unity dictates the rules on that mountain. Now, the tension reaches its climax, the air seeming to thin as seconds pass, and no one dares to break the siege of greed. But, to everyone's surprise, shop owner Yu begins to move, his hesitant steps echoing on the polished wooden floor. He walks to the side indicated by Hyun Jong, his expression laden with profound sadness and unexpected courage. Kong shouts, asking if he's lost his mind and reminding him that the Merchants' Council won't protect him if he does this. Yu stops, looks at the sect leader with respect, and then turns to face the hateful glares of his former partners. He explains that his family has lived in Hua for generations, and that he grew up hearing legends about the heroes of Mount Hua. I cannot simply let this history end like this because of a few gold coins, he declares with renewed firmness. Kong calls him a fool and an idiot, assuring him that he will bitterly regret losing everything he built for nothing. Yu merely shakes his head, saying he prefers financial ruin to carrying the regret of having destroyed the pride of his land. Hyun Jong watches the merchant with an approving gaze, keeping that name in his heart as the only just one among the wolves. Kong tries to regain control, saying that a single shop owner changes nothing, and that the total debt still needs to be paid. He demands that the sect hand over the keys to the warehouses immediately, claiming that the time for talk and tea has finally ended. Hyun Jong takes a deep breath, and suddenly his voice loses its pleading tone, becoming a thunder that makes the hall's walls tremble. I had hoped more of you would remember Mount Hua's benevolence, he says, his gaze now icy and deadly, focused. He signals to the disciples waiting in the shadows, and they bring a wooden crate that seems to radiate an aura of authority. Kong frowns, not understanding what's happening, but feeling a sudden chill run up his spine at the change in tone. The sect leader opens the crate with an abrupt movement, revealing hundreds of books with blue covers and official seals from the prefecture. The merchants instantly turn pale, recognizing the secret accounting books they had sworn were destroyed during the Great War. Hyun Jong takes out one of the volumes, flipping through it with terrifying calm, as he cites dates and values of businesses that were usurped. Here it says that this pavilion belongs to Mount Hua, and that Mr. Kong is merely a temporary administrator with enormous debts. Chaos breaks out among the merchants, who begin to stutter apologies and deny the authenticity of the documents they see before them. But the seals are real, the calligraphy is official, and the legal power contained within those pages is enough to destroy them. Hyun Jong announces that, according to the provincial laws, Mount Hua will fully reclaim all its businesses and property starting from now. Kong falls to his knees, his face, once red with arrogance, now gray with pure terror at the total ruin of his fortune. The other merchants try to flee, but the presence of the disciples at the gates prevents them from escaping the justice that was delayed, but arrived. The sect leader then looks at shop owner Yu and says that his business will be the only one spared, and in fact, will prosper under the sect. Yu cannot hold back his tears, realizing that his loyalty saved him from the abyss that swallowed all his greedy and blind peers. Hyun Jong rises from the throne, his figure appearing grander than ever, Mount Hua's glory finally beginning to rekindle. He declares that the sect will not only survive, but will crush anyone who dares to treat its name with frivolity. Kong now begs for mercy, the very mercy he denied minutes ago, but his words fall on ears of stone. The elder orders everyone to be removed from the mountain and that justice officials be called to formalize the reclaiming of the assets. The victory is absolute, a masterstroke that cleanses the filth that had accumulated at the sect's gates for decades of negligence. In the courtyard, the merchants are escorted like common criminals, their luxurious robes now seeming like rags before Mount Hua's recovered. Hua. Chung Myung descends from the wall and walks among them, his gaze of contempt being the last insult they take from that sacred mountain. He stops before Kong and smiles, that maniacal smile promising that the merchant's life will never be the same. The pig has finally gone to slaughter, the boy murmurs, his voice laden with a cruel satisfaction that chills those present. Hyunjong steps out into the courtyard, watching the sunset, feeling the weight he carried finally dissipate into the mountain air. He thanks Chung Myung in silences, knowing that without the boy's cunning and power, Mount Hua would be dead. The news of the business reclamation spreads like wildfire throughout the Hua prefecture, shocking everyone in the martial world. Mount Hua Sect, which everyone considered a corpse, gave its first sign of life, and it was a deafening roar. The disciples begin to train with new vigor, inspired by the sight of their leader, reclaiming the school's honor with authority, gold manuals, and now political power. The pieces of Chung Myung's puzzle are finally falling into place for the rebirth. Complete. Shopkeeper Yu becomes the sect's main business partner, his courage rewarded with a prosperity he never dared dream of. But as Mount Hua celebrates, shadows begin to stir in other sects, drawn by the sudden resurgence of a dangerous rival. The Southern Edge sect watches from afar, its spies reporting every move of Hyunjong and the strange black-haired boy. The balance of power in xianxia province has been shattered, and a new war is about to erupt on the mountain peaks. Chung Myung knows this. He smells the conflict on the wind, and it makes him more exhilarated than ever before. With that, he returns to his tree, opening a new book, but this time his focus isn't just on techniques, but on strategy. The boy gazes at the filled sky, remembering his fallen brethren, and swears that Mount Hua will never again be humiliated. Hyunjong approaches him, both watching the torch-lit sect, a symbol of hope amidst the darkness of the night. We have much work ahead, the elder says, his voice now firm and full of an authority he never once displayed. The boy agrees, but warns that the next phase will be far bloodier than merely dealing with fat, greedy merchants. They need to rebuild not just the treasury, but the fighting spirit of every disciple who wears the sect's uniform. The plum blossom must bloom again, and its scent must be the warning that the Sword Saint has returned. The torch flames dance in Chung Myung's eyes, reflecting the fire of an ambition that will consume all his future enemies. He rises and begins to practice a simple movement, but the force behind it makes the air whistle with danger. Every strike is a promise of vengeance, every breath a step towards the peak of the martial world he once dominated. The sect leader observes the technique, recognizing in it the pure essence of Mount Hua, something he thought was lost forever. The school's destiny is sealed, intertwined with that of a boy who carries both past and future in his hands. But while peace momentarily reigns on the mountain, a mysterious figure watches the temple from afar, with a gaze filled with malice. The world is changing, and Mount Hua is at the center of this storm that is only just beginning to gain strength in the deep valleys. Chung Myung stops his training, looking directly into the darkness where the figure hides, a defiant smile appearing on his face. "Come on then," he whispers, his voice carried by the wind beyond the temple walls, a challenge hurled into the unknown. The next morning brings new energy, with disciples clearing rubble and preparing the ground for the sect's new era. The gold is duly stored, the manuals are copied, and the accounting books are used to reclaim every inch of land. Hyunjong leads the process with renewed energy, looking 10 years younger after the victory over the corrupt merchants. But deep in his eyes, doubt still lingers. Who truly is this boy who brought them salvation? Chung Myung doesn't care about questions. He only cares about results and the path that leads to perfection. He knows that the real challenges are yet to come and that the world will not easily accept Mount Hua's return. But that doesn't matter, for he is ready to crush anyone who tries to stop the plum blossom from blooming on the mountain. The elder approaches one of the fallen disciples, helping him up and encouraging him to continue his training tirelessly. Now, the sun shines brightly over the main pavilion, and for the first time in decades, the name Mount Hua doesn't sound like defeat. The journey to the top has begun, and the martial world will soon tremble before the return of Xianxia's most legendary sect.